The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome back to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It. This is from Chapter 3, The Rise of the Corporatocracy, and it's in the middle of the chapter. It's the subchapter or subhead is Feudalist Takeover. America was not conceived of as a feudal state, F-E-U-D-A-L, feudalism being broadly defined as rule by the super rich. Our nation was created in large part in reaction against centuries of European feudalism. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said in his lecture titled The Fortune of the Republic, delivered on December 1st, 1863, quote, "We began with freedom. America was opened after the feudal mischief was spent. No inquisitions here, no kings, no nobles, no dominant church," end quote. The founding idea of America was that our country would not be ruled by a handful of very powerful rich men. America was founded as a country ruled by we the people. And for democracy to work, there had to be a strong and broad middle class. Even at our country's founding, there were some who who couldn't quite shake the idea that aristocracy was the way to go. As Jefferson warned in a letter in 1826 to William B. Giles, there are even those who, quote, "look to a single and splendid government of an aristocracy founded on banking institutions and moneyed corporations under the guise and cloak of their favorite branches of manufactures, commerce and navigation, riding and ruling over the plundered plowmen and beggared yeomanry, farmers and factory workers. This will be to them the next blessing of the monarchy, of their first aim and perhaps the surest stepping stone to it." The aristocracy that Jefferson feared rose first during the Gilded Age in the 1880s, when just a few companies seized control of much of America, including many of our elected officials. The major form of transportation and communication in those days was the railroads, and the railroads were owned by the Vanderbilts. The major form of energy then, as today, was oil, monopolized by John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust. And the major form of trade was in manufactured goods, which required factories, which in turn required steel, monopolized by Andrew Carnegie and his Carnegie Steel Company. These monopolists required ways to retain their hold on the money, so they turned to financiers like Jay Gould and John Pierpont Morgan, who set up large trusts for them. The Progressive Movement and then FDR beat back these monopolists with the Sherman Antitrust Act, the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, and other laws that regulated the game of business. Then Ronald Reagan, George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, and George Bush Jr. came along and turned back the clock. Reagan fought the labor laws. Bush Sr. pushed for fast-track trade authority for the president. Clinton finally took down trade protections with NAFTA. And Bush Jr. put corporate executives into the driver's seat on government legislation. We've entered a new robber baron era. Today, the major form of communication is by phone and the internet in an area increasingly monopolized by the new AT&T, formerly SBC singular AT&T. The major form of energy, oil, is controlled by just a handful of companies. Today's economic driver is the computer. Its software is monopolized by Microsoft, and its hardware is manufactured by a handful of oligarchs. Today, as in the Gilded Age, the rich are richer than ever. Forbes crows that in 2005, the rich got richer as the collective net worth of the United States' wealthiest climbed $125 billion to $1.13 trillion. That's greater than the gross domestic product of Spain or Canada. Bill Gates alone is worth $51 billion. 5 Walton family members, the owners of Walmart, made it into the top 10. Meanwhile, median household income fell for the 5th year in a row. In 1972, the median income for a person with a high school diploma was the equivalent of $42,600 in today's dollars. In 2002, the last year for which the National Center for Education Statistics compiled such numbers, a person with a high school diploma has a median income of $29,600. As the rich got richer, the rest of us got poorer, particularly what used to be of our middle class. The hallmark of the corporatocracy is monopoly. Fewer people holding more of the wealth, fewer companies holding more of the commons. The very competition that the conservatives claim to embrace is destroyed by the unrestrained growth of corporate interests. Big fish eat little fish over and over until there are no little fish left. And they eat the middle-sized fish until they're gone too. Look at the thoroughfares of any American city and ask yourself how many of the businesses here are locally owned. Instead of cash circulating within the local economy, at midnight every night a button is pushed and the local money from all over America is vacuumed away to Little Rock or Chicago or New York. And the corporate lords want more. Not content with their hold over the private sector, they want to take over the public sector too. When Jeb Bush was governor of Florida and cut a deal with Enron to privatize the Everglades, it diminished the power of the Florida government to protect a natural resource and enhanced the power and profitability of Enron. Similarly, when politicians argue for harsher sentencing guidelines and also advocate more corporate-owned prisons, they're enhancing the power and profits of one of America's fastest-growing and most profitable remaining domestic industries, privately owned prisons. The cons look at the government's pollution controls and see regulations that get in the way of their profits. They look at single-payer health care and see a threat to the pharmaceuticals industry's practice of price gouging. They look at Social Security and see an opportunity for more bonuses for Wall Street fat cats. And on it goes. The book is Screwed.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm back. I'm jet-lagged, but I'm back. We had an extraordinary trip. We went to Berlin, and we met with two of the Germany's leading, I would say probably the world's leading climate scientists, and talked with them on camera about what is being done, what is the state of the art, as it were. And it turns out, if we did away with all the subsidies that we provide for the fossil fuel industry, there would essentially no longer be a fossil fuel industry. I mean, outside of, making plastics and pharmaceuticals and things that, the tiny amounts of fossil fuels can be useful for. And even in those cases, I mean, it's basically just going after the carbon in them, and there's other ways to get that. They had these really cool windmills. They wind turbines. They were vertical. They didn't have a blade. They didn't look like an airplane blade. They looked more like kind of a circular thing that just spun around in a circle. I don't know how to describe it, but they're super efficient. And, Germany, of course, the cloudiest country in Europe, is generating enormous amounts of solar power. So that was fascinating. And then we flew up to Tromsø, Norway, which is the northern, it's under the Arctic Circle, 60 degrees latitude. And the sun never went down, which was an interesting experience. Wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and, hello! You go to sleep when you think, hey, I'm really starting to feel tired. Oh my God, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. But the sun's still out. And but Tromsø is just a beautiful town, and the university there has this center called CAGE, C-A-G-E. You can find their website online, and it is the leading, maybe the only, institute in the world that's principal focus is gas hydrates, specifically or largely methane hydrates. Methane, this stuff on the bottom of the ocean floor that for several years I've been saying, oh my God, this could kill us all. They're a little more sanguine about it. They've found enormous amounts of what are called methantropic bacteria that eat methane, and sort of like trees eat carbon dioxide. And so a lot of the methane that is dissociating out of the oceans and coming up as methane plumes into the water is actually, some of it is being absorbed by the water, some of it's being, reacting, but some of it is, most of it is actually being dissolved by these bacteria and turned into biomass, into bacteria, which become food for algae, which become food for little fish, which become food for medium-sized fish, which become food for big-sized fish. And boom, you're in the carbon cycle. That's the good news. The bad news is, while we were there, they had published a report about 2 weeks earlier about this methantropic bacteria and how it actually was reducing, because it was absorbing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and out of the water to combine with the methane, with the bacteria and all this kind of stuff. And so you'll recall back, I don't know, a decade or so ago, maybe 15 years ago, I think it was the Heartland Institute. It's one of those right-wing so-called think tanks, front groups that are supported in part by the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel billionaires, that had published this book, or had helped publish this, or promoted the book. We had the author on this show, which is how I remember the specifics of what I do remember of the specifics of it. I mean, this is, like I said, maybe a decade ago. And the whole point of his book is that trees absorb carbon dioxide and turn it into trees, right? And turn it into carbohydrates, into bark and leaves and things. And therefore, more carbon dioxide, happier trees. Well, the problem is that if you hit a certain level of carbon dioxide, it overwhelms the trees. It makes the trees grow so fast, but they don't have all the other nutrients they need. They can't get the phosphorus and the calcium and all that kind of stuff. And instead, it actually starts killing the trees. And so the big question now that they're dealing with in Tromsø is, how much methane will it take to overcome that bacteria's need for other things? So anyhow, that was my week. And I didn't see any live polar bears. Louise just put a picture of a polar bear in the bar next to our hotel that I was standing in front of over on our Facebook page, for what it's worth. And it was a very, very interesting trip, and I'm semi-recovered from it. It was also interesting to talk to a bunch of Norwegians and Germans about the United States and about Donald Trump and about all this stuff that's going on. The Comey firing, what's going on with Trump. I'm increasingly convinced, this is pure speculation / opinion, but I'm increasingly convinced that Trump is not so much hiding something that might be embarrassing, but that he's hiding things that might be criminal. And I don't know what they are. I suspect that they may have to do with both the American and the Russian mafia, and maybe mobsters in other countries, several of the Stan countries. He's got a Trump hotel in the Philippines. He's got business interests in Turkey, I believe. I think Donald Trump is hiding criminality. And now you've got Chuck Schumer saying, you want a new FBI director? Good luck. Give us a special and independent prosecutor first. Now, Congress used to, for a while, Congress had the power to appoint that person. That law expired. But the Justice Department still has the ability to do that. Now, Jeff Sessions has recused himself from anything having to do with Trump investigations, at least as they relate to Russia, because Jeff Sessions himself lied before Congress under oath about talking to members of the Russian administration. I think it was specifically Sergei Kislyak, the ambassador. So that drops it down to his number 2 guy, whose name is what, Rosenberg or something like that. It's not Rosenberg, but it's something close to that. In any case, his number 2 guy, the guy who wrote the memo about you ought to fire Comey because of what he did to Hillary. Like, we're all buying that, right? Rosenstein? Thank you, Troy. Troy is my alternate brain. Troy and Chris and Nate, between the 3 of them, they keep me going. And the more I look, the more it's like this has been the history of his businesses. Is doing business with the mob and I mean, to a certain extent, I suppose if you're a developer in New York, you have to do business with the mob. But when you're president of the United States, there's a different level of scrutiny and there's a different set of standards. that you should live by. I don't know how to say it beyond that. Just, very, very straightforward stuff. And an interesting, while just coming back from Norway, there's an interesting piece here in the New York Times, the opinion pages by Lee Siegel. It's called "For Liberals, Is It Time to Move to Norway?" Norway this year, in the, a couple of years ago, Louise and I did this show for a week or two from Denmark because Denmark was rated the #1 happiest country in the world. This year it was Norway. And so Lee Siegel is, writing about he or she spent a bunch of time in Norway. And, then came back and thought about going back to Norway with George W. Bush and, now. But it raises an interesting question. Norway has world-class health care, world-class higher education. It's all free. Lee writes, "The contrast makes me want to weep. For the first time in 40 years and now with a wife and 2 children," I guess Lee is a man, "I find myself planning to propose to my wife that we all move to another country." And then basically concludes it by saying, "No, goodbye, Norway. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to fight," which is how I feel. I mean, my father's mother and father both came from Norway. I felt very at home. I'm half Norwegian. I felt very at home there. Saw a lot of people who looked like a lot of my relatives, which was an interesting experience. In fact, there was one waitress who looked so much like my cousin, I almost said something. A cousin who has now passed away. But what are you thinking of doing? How are you reacting to this? I mean, this is truly bizarre times. The Sunday Review of the New York Times by the editorial board. The new standards for Republicans in America. If you're president, you can freely attack average citizens, private citizens on Twitter. You can delegitimize federal judges who rule against you. You can refuse to take responsibility for military actions gone awry. You can fire the FBI chief while he's investigating you. You can accuse a former president without evidence of an impeachable offense. You can employ top aides with financial and other connections to a hostile foreign power. You can blame the judiciary in advance for terror attacks. You can call the media the enemy of the American people. I mean, it goes on and on. It's really extraordinary.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I got to tell you, the biggest sensation I had when leaving the United States was like I was leaving some sort of bizarro world, and while being in Europe, like normal. Wow, this is normal. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Jim in Redway, California. Hey, Jim, you wanted to talk about the Clathrate gun hypothesis?
Good morning, Tom, and thank you for everything you do. My question is the upper Siberian coast from Norway to Alaska is noted for being fairly shallow, 30 meters or so. And there are literally tons of clathrate stored in that shallow water. Now, we have receding Arctic ice in the winter, and in addition to that, it's a telltale sign. But we also have, 4 going on 5 years of increasing atmospheric temperature globally. My question is, at some point, with those 2 things happening, that irregardless of the number of bacteria in the soil, that you're going to reach a release point at which tons, millions, billions of tons of methane will be released simultaneously. And at that point, it would overwhelm the bacteria, and we're screwed.
Well, that's a concern. Just a couple of clarifications. First of all, the bacteria is not in the soil. I mean, much of it is, the methantropic bacteria, but there's also methantropic bacteria in the ocean. In fact, it's living aggressively around these methane clathrate beds, feeding on them continuously. There are cold water bacteria and there are warm water bacteria. I learned all about all these different bacterial species. So, number one. Number two, parts of the Arctic Ocean are as deep as 5,000 feet, a mile deep. Although the stuff around Svalbard and Tromsø and all that, you're right, it's fairly shallow. And in fact, one of the reasons we sent a camera crew to Svalbard, and we're going to have some great footage of that, but we couldn't get there ourselves because the fjords that are normally frozen are no longer frozen. And you can't just take a snowmobile across, and you know, it's getting very, very complicated. The third thing is that a lot of the clathrates, there are two variables that determine their existence and survival. One is temperature, but the other is pressure. And we interviewed one guy who was like the world's leading expert on the existence of clathrate, shall we say. And his point was that the majority of the major clathrate deposits all around the world are at fairly deep levels, and that you would have to see as much as a 20-degree increase in ocean temperature to compensate for the pressure that is keeping them stable. And that's extremely unlikely. We may have seen that during the Permian mass extinction, but that's, you know, over the short term, that's extremely unlikely. But, you know, while there were several scientists I talked to who kind of ridiculed the clathrate gun hypothesis, there were others who were a little more sanguine. You know, nobody, remember when the movie Day After Tomorrow came out and everybody was like, oh, in 3 days the world's going to freeze, and ha, 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 ha. Well, you know, really what they did is in 3 days they took, like, you know, what would probably occur over a couple of decades or even a few years. The clathrate gun thing could go off over a period of 1,000 years, and that would be extremely problematic. Or 10,000 years, as it probably did in many of the previous extinctions. And that would be extremely problematic. The danger is the tipping points, and that's what everybody's freaked out about. I'm not saying these guys were just, you know, everything's cool. They were very, very concerned about the tipping points. Jim, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. China is planning a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure. Now, we can't even fix our damn roads and bridges. And when we have a conversation about it, when the Republicans dominate the conversation, they say, well, you know, we've got lots and lots of billionaires who are sitting on trillions and trillions of dollars. Let's have them build our roads and bridges and then put toll roads on them, you know, put toll booths on them, and we'll all pay them. And over time, the millionaires will get richer and richer. And won't that be wonderful? China is saying that's stupid. There's this thing called investment. And Jane Perlez and Hufang Huang, writing in the New York Times on May 13th, this was Friday, I guess. Along the jungle-covered mountains of Laos, squads of Chinese engineers are drilling hundreds of tunnels and bridges to support a 260-mile railroad, a $6 billion project that will eventually connect 8 Asian countries. Chinese money is building power plants in Pakistan to address chronic electricity shortages, part of an expected $46 billion worth of investment. Now, investment is not a word Republicans will use for this kind of thing. They would call it cost or burden. This is an investment. Chinese planners are mapping out train lines from Budapest to Belgrade, Serbia. providing another artery for Chinese goods flowing into Europe through a Chinese-owned port in Greece. The massive infrastructure projects, along with hundreds of others across Asia, Africa, and Europe, form the backbone of China's ambitious economic and geopolitical agenda. President Xi Jinping of China is literally and figuratively forging ties, creating new markets, and it goes on from there. It's $1 trillion plan. And what are we doing? We're sitting around trying to figure out how to give a $600 billion tax break to billionaires by taking health care away from 24 million people. And we're sitting around trying to figure out how to lower our corporate tax rate from the effective 17% that's paid at a 35% marginal tax rate down to a 15% marginal tax rate so they can all pay an effective 5%. We're also trying to figure out how to take, these LLC, limited liability corporations, these pass-through entities, like the Wall Street banksters and doctors and lawyers and private investment people and the hedge fund owners and some big companies. Enron had a bunch of these. Koch Industries has a bunch of these. How to drop their tax rate down to 15% too, so that the people who own them don't even have to pay the 39% top income tax rate. That's what we're doing. We're sitting around obsessing on how we can make rich people richer and how we can screw working people. China is building infrastructure literally across China. They've already built, this was back, 6 years ago they finished this. They built a high-speed train that travels 300 miles an hour that is the equivalent of the distance from Chicago to New York. It took them 4 years to do it. This boom, instant thing, this train. And we were going to build a high-speed train between Los Angeles and San Francisco, with a whole bunch of money that California raised, and there were some federal matching funds. What does Trump do? He comes in, he says, screw the matching. Actually, it wasn't even Trump. It was a bunch of Republican members of Congress from California who voted against it. Just like Paul Ryan wouldn't take money to connect Milwaukee and Madison with high-speed rail. Just like Mike Pence wouldn't take high-speed rail money. Just like John Kasich wouldn't take high-speed rail money. It's like, are you kidding? That's something average people might do. I came into work this morning and I took the metro. It was fast. It was convenient. It was clean. It was nice. It was $1.50. Maybe $2.50, actually. You think of how many metros did. I had to change trains and stuff. But we can't have that. We need private airports for the billionaires. Oh, and in fact, let's privatize the air transport system. By the way, traveling around Europe, never once did I take my shoes off. Never once did I step through a Chertoff X-ray porno scanner. Never once did I get patted down or get my crotch grabbed. It was amazing. It was civil. Everybody treated me nicely. I got to tell you, that was amazing. What the hell is going on with this country? We've got to start standing up. We've got to, I realize we are, and I realize many of you are. And I so honor that. We've got to double our efforts. We'll be back. Let me pick up your phone calls. I've been going way too long. I'd like to hear from you, too.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I still have a bunch of news. We've got a couple of guests today, but they'll be relatively short. Mostly, anything goes week, whatever you want to talk about. Give me a shout.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the crash of 2016, one of my favorites. In her writings, this is from page 62, by the way, a middle-class primer is the chapter title. In her writings, which have become foundational for libertarian theology, author Ayn Rand suggested that the only purpose of government should be to prevent oppression by force. What she neglected to consider was all the force inherent in nature. If you're hungry, there is the force of biology. If you're homeless, you confront the force of winds, storms, ice, and rain. If you're sick, you confront the ravages and force of disease. These were the forces that provoked the first governments, the first communities, the first clans and tribes, the first nation states. It's easy for libertarian elitists, such as multimillionaire TV talking heads or college kids reading Atlas Shrugged, to talk about how there should be no government beyond police, the army, and the courts. They all have enough resources that they don't need to deal with the forces of raw nature. And that explains why billionaires would bankroll libertarian-leaning think tanks that will, when the crash comes with its full force, tell us it was caused by big government. However, in the real world, humans must confront both nature and other humans, which is why we create governments and why we create economies. But it wasn't until 1776 when Thomas Jefferson placed John Locke's right to life, liberty, and property, or replaced it, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the idea of a large class of working people had the ability to pursue happiness, the middle class. It wasn't until 1776 that that was even seriously considered as a cornerstone obligation to government. This is also the first time in history that the word happiness had ever appeared in any nation's formative documents, as Jefferson wrote in 1817 to Dr. John Manners, quote, "The evidence of this natural right, like that to our right of life, liberty, the use of our faculties, the pursuit of happiness is not left to the feeble and sophisticated investigations of reason, but is impressed on the sense of every man." As Jefferson realized, with no government interference by setting the rules of the game of business and fair taxation, there could be no broad middle class, maybe a sliver of small business and artisans, but the vast majority of us would be the working poor under the yoke of elites. The economic royalists know this, which gets to the root of why they set out to destroy government's involvement in the economy. After all, in a middle-class economy, they may have to give up some of their power, and some of the higher end of their wealth may even be redistributed, horrors of horrors, for schools, parks, libraries, and other things that support a healthy middle-class society but are not needed by the rich, who live in a parallel but separate world from the rest of us. As Jefferson laid out in his 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval, a totally free market where corporations reign supreme, just like the oppressive governments of old, could transform America, quote, "until the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bella omnium in omnia, which some philosophers observing to be so general in this world have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man." Although this may come as a sudden realization to many, we've really known it all our lives. In fact, in the 6,000-year history of the civilized world, a middle class emerging in any nation has been such a rarity as to be largely historically invisible. The United States has had two great periods of what we today call a middle class. The first was from the 1700s to the mid-1800s and was fueled by virtually free land for settlers, stolen from the Indians, and free labor, slavery in the South and indentured immigrants in the North. The result was, as de Tocqueville pointed out, the most well-educated, politically active, middle-class, non-aristocrats in the world. The second period didn't take hold until after World War II, during my dad's lifetime. Unlike the first, which was fueled by free land and slaves, the second had to be carefully constructed with specific and what some might define as socialist policies put in place during the New Deal, which asserted more democratic control over the economy and workplace in order to keep the economic royalists in check. To both stimulate and balance the domestic economy, FDR reinstituted progressive taxation, which gave workers more to spend and gave the rich an incentive to pay their workers better to maintain a stable workplace, since if they took the money themselves, it would just mostly go to taxes, thus stimulating demand for more goods and services. Progressive taxation has a long history. As Jefferson said in a 1785 letter to James Madison, quote, "Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from taxation all below a certain point and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise." FDR eventually hiked the top income tax rate paid by the super rich in America to 90%. This had a twofold effect. First, it held income inequality in check and ushered in an era of equal income and a growth among all classes. Unlike the Gilded Age, when the economy grew at a blistering pace but the gains were afforded only to the robber barons, the period between 1947 and 1980 saw unparalleled equitable growth. During these 30-plus years, the poorest fifth in America saw a 116% increase in their incomes. The middle fifth, 111% increase. Top 5% only saw an 85% increase. All income classes shared in the prosperity of the times when the top marginal income tax rate was above 70%. The second effect of a high income tax rate was to bring stability to the economy. And then it goes through the whole explanation of how that worked. The book is The Crash of 2016.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Literally. I guess, welcome back to me. I guess you're supposed to say that, not me, but whatever. It's so nice to be back. I love doing this show. I love being back in Washington, D.C. I love being back in the United States. I mean, yeah, I'm sounding like, I love Europe. I lived in Europe for a year. I lived in Germany for a year. The cultures are very different. And, if I was a European, I'd be very, very happy that I was living in Europe right now. I'll tell you that. But as an American, I'm very happy to be living in the United States, and I want to do everything I can to make this country a better country. The other observation that I got, or that I had while I was in Europe, and I talked politics with quite a few people. Most of the Germans and Norwegians that I ran into wanted to ask me if I thought Trump was crazy or whatever. Kind of surface level conversations in a way. But the one theme that kept recurring was, has your nation been taken over by a group of billionaires? Are you no longer that democracy that we all want to be like? Like the European Union was kind of based on the transition in the United States in 1789 from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. Under the Articles of Confederation, we were 13 separate nations with basically a free trade agreement. And under the Constitution, we became it's called federalism. We became a federal society, a federal nation, the strong federal government. Now, that got a lot stronger after the Civil War. There was a big change then, from strong states to from weak states and strong federal government, strong states and weak federal government to the other way around. But increasingly, I'm looking, for example, at this thing, Sinclair Broadcasting, one of the largest television groups in the United States, is in the process. They're in about 39% of all households, and 40% is the FCC limit. They're trying to buy a whole bunch more stations, and they've got these like cram down policies on right-wing politics and stuff that they've got to that their people had to play on the air. And, I've been complaining is not quite the right word about Sinclair. They're sort of like the local version of Fox News in a way. For many years, I mean, this goes back to I believe it was Sinclair that the Citizens United organization wanted to play their hit piece on Hillary Clinton back in 2008 that led to the Supreme Court case. I could be wrong about the Sinclair part, but I'm not. I don't believe I am. But our media landscape, I mean, there's just so many things that make me think that Jimmy Carter on this program was right when he said that we're not a democracy anymore, we're an oligarchy. And the question in my mind is, how do we reverse that? And of course, I think the answer is get money out of politics, amend the Constitution, move to amend.org, all that. But long before we do that, we've got to wake up a lot of people. And I think that given all these people who voted for Donald Trump, and I realize Hillary Clinton won by 3 million more votes, but the Republicans still control the House and Senate, and we Democrats lost nearly 1,000 state houses and state governorships during the 8 years of the Obama presidency. There's something going on here, and I think it has to do with big money and big media, right-wing media all over the country, and the impact of Fox News in the United States, that countries like Norway just wouldn't have it. And it was interesting watching the news as we traveled around, watching Agence France-Presse, the French English language news, watching Deutsche Welle, the German English language news, watching CNN International and seeing stories on CNN International that I would never see on CNN domestic. That really blew my mind. So anyhow, but like I said, I want to pick up your phone calls here. Joe in DeKalb, Illinois. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How you doing? Glad
I'm
you're
great.
back, and Alex did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, I should have started out by thanking Alex. I mean, he came in for a week and busted his butt for us, and Sam on TV as well, Sam Sachs, and I am so grateful to these guys.
Show here.
Yeah, he does good. So what's up, Joe?
What am I doing to prepare for what's going to.
What's going to what?
I've grown up in a rural town.
Joe, your phone is fading in and out. Is that because you're pausing and listening to the radio, or is it because your phone has got a problem?
It could be. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay.
Just talk to me and don't listen to the radio.
Sure. No, radio's not on here.
Okay.
I live about an hour west of Chicago. It's a rural town called DeKalb, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
We had a shooting here in 2005 at Northern Illinois University. Seeing as how things are going, I'm comfortable.
Oh, Joe, your phone just went away again. Are you sure you don't have like your thumb over the microphone or something?
Nope. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Like I was saying, I come from a rural town. I'm comfortable with guns.
Oh. Joe, it's still doing it. I'm going to put you on hold, and we're going to try and figure out what this is. But I'm sorry, we just burned through like almost 2 minutes just trying to get to your point. No offense, but we got a phone problem here. Don in Evergreen, Colorado. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Well, Tom, with everything that's been going on the past few days, I thought the order of succession of the presidency might become a player here very soon.
Yeah.
And so I started going down the list to see what there was.
Yeah, it goes vice president, goes speaker of the House, then they start with the cabinet.
Yep, Vice President Mike Pence, too many connections to the Russia cover-up. Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, connected to the Russian money laundering through the super PACs. The FBI just raided one of the big Republican fundraisers, and there's at least rumors that he's connected. President pro tempore of the Senate, Orrin Hatch, couldn't find a whole lot on him. WikiLeaks is pretty sanitized, but he did apparently vote enthusiastically for Gorsuch. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, business conflicts of interest with the Russian oil deal.
Yeah.
Secretary of the Treasury, Stephen Mnuchin, he's from Goldman Sachs. Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, Mad Dog, he got thrown off the Joint Chiefs during the Obama administration.
Don, where are you going with all this?
Well, I went all the way down, and the first one I found that was acceptable was number 16, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, David Shulkin. None of them above that. All of them have conflicts or serious ideological problems.
Yeah. Whether they do or don't have associations with Russia or Russians or whatever, I see that as one symptom of a much larger problem. I mean, you've got, Russian oligarchs and who are obviously funneling money to Donald Trump and things like that. But the American oligarchs are causing me some concern. I mean, frankly, an enormous amount of concern. From running a television network, Fox News, to basically locking up virtually all the major radio stations in the United States so that they only play right-wing hate radio all the time, to this administration now, we've got complete regulatory capture all across the administration where agencies like the EPA and the FDA and the USDA that are supposed to be protecting us are instead protecting the industries that they have now been staffed with. We've got, I think, to point to any one thing, whether it's Russia, whether it's the Koch brothers, whatever, to point to any one thing and say this is the thing that freaks me out, is to miss the fact that we're experiencing as a country a death by 1,000 paper cuts. It seems to me.
Oh, and I would like to see us go. As these structures disintegrate, the government and finance and all this stuff, I'd like to see us go back to a council of wise elders along the lines of the old Iroquois nation. I think we'd have a much better government, people that actually represented the citizens rather than...
Well, that was Jefferson's sales pitch for the Electoral College. Now, and he never wrote about this. At least I never read it in his writings, and I spent 2 years reading his writings. But it's looking increasingly like the Electoral College was really a way of mollifying the slave states, giving them a little more voice in who's president. But the Council of Wise Elders, the thing that makes me a little skitsy about that is when I was living in Germany and Scott Berg and I were writing this book on the religion of the Nazis, one of the things that we learned was that Hitler's sales pitch was, 1,000 years of peace, the Third Reich, the worldwide Reich, and that the 1,000 years of peace would be instituted by Hitler running the entire world. And he was this wise man, and he had, in Wavelsburg, he had this castle where he had these 12 disciples, and Scott and I broke into it and took pictures and stuff. And that when anybody ever has that kind of power, you've got a problem. And in fact, I would say that one of the biggest problems we have in the United States right now is that in 1803, George Marshall, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, took that power onto himself in the Marbury versus Madison decision and said the Supreme Court can strike down laws made by Congress. And then starting in 1886, Congress actually started creating laws, and now we're seeing, and we're seeing this big time with things like Citizens United, where they're literally inventing laws, out of whole cloth, and they're unanswerable to anybody. It's a non-democratic institution, and those are the things that frankly I think are our greatest threats. I'm with Jefferson on this, that if we can devolve power to the people, and I realize this is a conservative talking point, but it's not, there's no such thing as conservative anymore. They are now the billionaire shills, or they're marginalized. They get pushed out of the way like David Frum did. But the conservative talking point was, let the power go to the lowest level, to the people, to the ward, to the district. And I'm with that. Don, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Pat in Juanita, Nebraska. Am I saying it right, Pat? Watching Free Speech?
Yes, you are. You always get it right.
Okay.
And I think I'm going to have my name changed to Patriot Pat.
Okay. Hey, Patriot Pat. How you doing? What's up?
Well, welcome back, Tom.
Thanks
for taking my call. It seems like Democrats are missing a fabulous opportunity to take the House back in 2018, but instead of their being proactive, they're reactive by beating the drum about Russia-Trump ties. And Republicans are quite obviously not going to do anything about Trump, no matter what he does. And of course, it's horrible what he's done.
Well, they should be able to
do anything.
Pat, they should be able to chew gum and walk at the same time. I mean, if there is a problem, if there is something there between Donald Trump and either the Russian government, the Russian mob, or some Russian oligarchs, it should be investigated. It should be investigated here, and frankly, it should be investigated in Russia. I mean, let's get the truth out about this. But, at the same time, there's all this other stuff that Trump is doing, and the Democrats, shouldn't just be singing one song. I agree with you. But I'm not arguing against that song. What I'm saying is, let's point out all these horrible things that are going on. Back to you, Pat.
Yes, but the Republicans aren't going to let anything get in the way of their greedy, sick agendas. So, but it seems to me that we have a door right now. The opportunity Democrats have is, of course, H.R. 676, expanded and improved Medicare for all.
Right.
And I think it's got like 108 co-sponsors, all Democrat. But we never hear about it on corporate media. Now, I did hear Dianne Feinstein say at a town hall, I think, she said when she was asked, why don't we go to single payers? She says, well, we're just not there yet. And I thought, good gravy, Marie, this is driving me insane. So, here they've got Republicans have a horrible bill that's passed the House. Democrats could become loved and revered if they just show how, taking the blood-sucking insurance companies out of the mix, it would lower the cost, improve, and give health care to everyone. Why can't they do it, Tom?
Well, I would like to charitably think that what Dianne Feinstein meant was that elections have consequences, that we lost 1,000 local seats all across the United States over the last 8-10 years, and that we lost the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court. And without the power that the Republican, the bad news is the Democrats can't move the country forward because they lack the power that comes from all those seats that have been taken by the Republicans. The good news is that the Republicans, by and large, at least with big issues, don't know how to govern. Now, the bad news is, of course, that the Republicans are using this as an opportunity with the smaller things, and some of them are quite consequential, you know, the fate and future of our national parks, you know, the clean air rules, the clean water rules, the pharmaceuticals, things like that. But the Republican, the destruction that the Republicans are doing is more handing money off to their donor class, and preventing the Democrats from doing anything positive or progressive. So, you know, what that tells me is that there really is no longer a conservative governing philosophy. There is no longer a Republican governing philosophy. If there was, you would have seen it in effect in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Instead, what there is an anti-progress agenda, an anti-progressive agenda, an anti-worker, anti-labor, basically anti-American agenda. You know, pro-billionaire, anti-American. And that's all the Republicans have. Our job is to wake people up to that. And then, you know, as Feinstein said, then we'll have the political power to do it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to just make a comment about press freedom. I really find it disturbing, some of the things that Donald Trump is saying. And, you know, right now, and I think you're absolutely right, we need to double down and really push popular sentiment against things like the Trump, care bill. I mean, it's not really a care bill at all. It's just a
tax cut,
giving money to billionaires, and it's going to suck out $1 trillion out of healthcare. It's going to devastate healthcare. I am a healthcare person. I deliver care, and I think it's really going to be a bad thing. But I think that the attacks on press freedom, the attacks on the First Amendment, there is possibly pushback against the First Amendment. There have been comments made by very powerful people in the government to change the First Amendment. This is what is giving us the freedom to do what we're doing right now. And right now I'm listening to you on streaming media, and that could change. I mean, in other words, I would have to pay extra in order to get free speech TV. It would be so slow. It wouldn't be able to be easily read.
Well, you have the benefit of being in Minneapolis, where one of the few really brilliant independent stations, KTNF, is located, by the way. So if you don't know about them, check them out, because it's a great radio station.
Yeah, and I do know about them, and I am very lucky to live here. But I think that just overall, this is a real danger, and we need to double down on any attacks on the internet, and we need to really
Ajit Pai is already,
because
he's already bragging about what he's going to do.
And it just,
which is unthinkable in Europe.
I've seen the results of lack of press freedom in this country, and just recently in the health care bill, talking about it on Minnesota Public Radio, which likes to pretend that they're very objective. They didn't even state, like, for instance, there was a person who was representing a libertarian think tank called the Pacific Institute, and it was started by an old Etonian, elitist libertarian. I don't know how he got to San Francisco or what he was doing there. I haven't had time to really research it. But, when you present a program, an opinion program like that, why don't you, say this person is from the libertarian think tank, the Pacific Institute, and describe what it is. I've taken only one journalism class in college, and that was one of the things from Tony Hillerman. And, that was one
brilliant
thing
writer.
You describe very succinctly what it is, what the conversation, you try to include as much information very succinctly, which I'm not very good at, and you describe who's talking, who they represent, as much information as you can squeeze in. And this is not done, even, with media outlets like Minnesota Public Radio, which, I mean, they don't do necessarily a bad job, but they just are very corporatized, and I find it kind of frustrating because the arguments that they're putting forth, like the Specific Institute, are the same tired arguments that I heard back when Hillary Clinton was talking about single payer and health care in this country and made it, in the 90s. So, we really need to double down, and we need to, protect, I think, our First Amendment rights and our ability to communicate with one another to change this whole thing, because we have Sinclair and we have Fox News. And I think that in Europe, they don't have that kind of concentration of media.
Except in England.
Yeah.
There was a brilliant piece, I think it was in the Financial Times, it might have been another publication, about how all of the British press the tabloid press is entirely right-wing. Mm-hmm. Times of London is owned by Murdoch.
Yeah.
All, with the exception of The Guardian and the Financial Times, and the Financial Times has a rather conservative editorial page, but they tend not to get political. Mm-hmm. But with the exception of The Guardian and the Financial Times, two papers that I read every day, all of the British press, print press, is hard right, and has been largely since the decade after Maggie Thatcher.
Rupert Murdoch was responsible for that, and then he came over here and
did it to us.
Fox News.
Right, and the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal.
France or Germany, England has very bad press freedom, and they're also in the same position politically, interestingly enough. So the connection between media and politics is so strong, and we need to change that.
Yeah, I agree. This would be a completely different country if three corporations didn't control the vast majority of our radio stations, and they program nothing but right-wing hate radio, and if Fox News did not exist. This would be a different country. We would be more rational. We would be having sane conversations. It would be, but see, it's not just that. I mean, that's a symptom of this larger issue, which is what Henry Wallace identified back in 1944, the Vice President of the United States, which is that, they pretend to be super patriots, but what they're really questing for is government power so that they can merge that government power with the power that they already control in the marketplace and create what he referred to as a fascist state. And I would say we're there, or we're damn close to there. There's a few little outposts, this station, and some of the networks that carry this station, and a robust internet, which Ajit Pai has come right out and said he wants to do away with. We will be the only advanced democracy in the world if Donald Trump's FCC chairman has his way. Literally, the only advanced democracy in the world that does not have net neutrality. We are going the way of China. And there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And it's already happened in our television media. It's already happened in our radio media. It is happening in our print media as more and more of our newspapers all across the country are being bought up by large corporations, small number of large corporations that skew right. And it's very, very concerning. John, thanks for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. We'll be back. We've got, we have a guest in the next hour. Greg Palast is going to be with us. How wonderful. Plus, we'll be picking up your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University, our book club. And today we're reading from Ralph Nader's Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. This is from page 74, the chapter How the System is Rigged. According to Russell Mokaber, editor of the Corporate Crime Reporter, quote, corporate crime takes far more lives, causes far more injuries and diseases, and steals far more money than street crime. But the vast amount of law enforcement resources, mass media attention, and prison cell blocks are devoted only to street crime. Just consider these preventable casualties. Almost 60,000 annual workplace-related fatalities from both disease and trauma. 54,000 deaths a year from air pollution. Over 100,000 lives lost as a result of medical malpractice. Nearly 100,000 lives lost from hospital-induced infections. Over 100,000 fatalities from adverse effects of drugs, and over 40,000 deaths every year due to inadequate or no health care coverage for diagnosis, treatment, and medication. There are far larger numbers of sicknesses and injuries attached to these data sets. These statistics have haunting human faces. Children, women, men, and families destroyed by uncontrollable, monetized minds. Whether they are caused by recklessness, criminal negligence, or worse, the key factors in common are the preventability of such pain and the suffering inflicted from commercially induced neglect, predation, manslaughter, and homicide. By comparison, street and home homicides do not exceed 14,000 lives lost annually. Now see how companies have made sure they have the laws that they need to go after you, and how they make sure that the law can be used as their punisher. The giant multi-tiered home mortgage business, now driven by the same 1%ers who profited from crashing the economy in 2008, can nail you if you misrepresent information on your mortgage application. Suppose you say you're going to occupy your house as a principal residence to get a lower interest rate and down payment, and you don't for some reason. Lenders can call the loan and demand repayment if the mortgage balance is outstanding. Absent that payment, the lender can seize your home, foreclosure. In addition, by claiming you committed bank fraud, these companies can use the FBI against you. As the veteran housing columnist Kenneth R. Harvey warned, this can trigger severe financial penalties, prosecution, and prison time for ordinary Americans. But how many bankers feel the cold metal of handcuffs tighten on their wrists when their crimes rob American families of their homes and life savings? Health insurance companies have similar supporting laws to deny medical coverage by alleging illegal activities. This could mean anything from non-disclosure of traffic violations to gun accidents, even when there has been no conviction. It could mean something as vague as hazardous behavior, according to the New York Times. If a company paid you and comes back for their money, they can get you prosecuted for fraud. These corporate Goliaths are too big to fail. If they know how to enact laws to make sure that you are, and they know how to enact laws to make sure that you are too small to stop them. Corporate state culture, the plutocracy whom oligarchy is given an astonishing exoneration, so long as it claims that violence and mayhem are not their direct purpose, but an unfortunate byproduct that just couldn't be helped. Like when innocent people are accidentally killed by U.S. drone attacks, the government seems to quietly get a free pass. It's almost as if corporations get away with a permanent defense of an institutional insanity, a defense going global in terms of deadly supply chains, from horrific African mines to dangerous factories in China, India, and Bangladesh. Deoxygenation and poisoning of the vast oceans, estuaries, rivers, and lakes.
upping greenhouse gases into rapid climate destabilization, extending the range of infectious diseases due to habitat and ecological disruption and desecration, and changing the nature of nature itself through unregulated genetic engineering and nanotechnology. Even with 6 million slow, agonizing deaths a year globally attributed to the tobacco business, cigarettes are still demonically promoted by one-percenters who reap staggering profits from selling their addictive and poisonous product, especially in developing nations where regulations protecting children do not exist. The excuse is forever that corporatists have no intention, knowledge, or reason to do harmful things. The institutional insanity defense again. Or the manufacturers of weapons of mass destruction, whose militant advertisements say they are just helping the national defense, but are not at all responsible for their products' use in the coercive policies of empire and perpetual war. Is it institutional madness or infantilism? Did the World War II allies let the giant Krupp works in Germany get away with this excuse after the war ended? It's time for people to take away these rationalizations of omnicide from corporations that demand they be legally privileged as persons for their pursuit of profits, but not as persons for our pursuit of them as criminal predators and refugees from justice. In the 2012 U.S. presidential campaign, Republican nominee Mitt Romney, asked about corporate personhood, replied that it was a given, saying, "Hey, corporations are people, my friend," like it was a science fact he learned in 5th grade. This is no mere throwaway line. Billions of dollars of litigating, advertising, marketing, and corporatist commentary have been focused on driving this people image into our minds from childhood. Regularly, full-page ads show that Goliath corporations like Walmart or Lockheed Martin are just people like you. The ads are filled with pictures and names of the faithful workers who bring you goods and services. The book by Ralph Nader, Breaking Through Power.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us is our old friend Greg Palast. He is the investigative reporter and contributor to Rolling Stone magazine, author and filmmaker of The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. His website, Greg Palast, PALAST.com. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast. And Greg, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be with you again, Tom.
It's always great having you with us, Greg. So I was out of the country last week, and but every day I was checking the news on my phone. And here comes this story that Donald Trump has decided that he's going to create a commission to investigate voter fraud. And he's going to put Chris Kobach in charge of it. I'm sure you have something to say about this.
Yeah, I would laugh too, except I've been crying.
Yeah.
So now I'm laughing. Okay, Chris Kobach.
I was sitting with a bunch of Norwegians up in Tromsø, up in the Arctic Circle, and I tried to explain this to them, that in the United States we have a political party that works to prevent people from voting. And they thought I was joking. Honest to God, I think to this day, by the end of the conversation, I don't think I had convinced them that I wasn't punking them. Back to you.
Yeah, well, I can imagine, because in the rest of the world, well, it depends where, but much of the world is beginning to learn that American democracy isn't quite a democracy yet. Chris Kobach is the Secretary of State of Kansas. He's also Trump's vote thief in chief. And as you know from he was actually the central bad guy in my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, for Rolling Stone. I've been investigating him for Al Jazeera 3.5, 4 years. This guy is the guy who came up with the various schemes, whether you call it cross-check, citizenship proof, SB 1070. I can give you a list, but he's the guy who's come up with the various technical, secretive, and vilely racist means of suppressing the vote. The New York Times says, he supports voter ID. That's just the tip of the junkberg. This is the guy who created that list called Crosscheck. Remember when Donald Trump says 3 million people Trump said 3 million people have voted twice. He's referring to a list of 7 million names.
No, I think what he said was that there were 3 million illegal votes, and the implication was they were Mexicans who weren't citizens.
Right. Well, some were that, but he also said in another on one of his talks on Fox, he said that there are 3 million illegal people
dual voters
illegally registered in 2 states, so they twice.
Which, of course, is Kobach's thing.
Yeah, that's Kobach's thing. It's called cross-check. And what he did was he literally, and this is important, he got 30 Republican secretaries of state. Those are the people in charge of voting in your state. He got the GOP secretaries of state to remove 1.1 million voters from the voter rolls. Take Michigan, where he had 500,000 people on his suspect list. They removed about 50,000. The Secretary of State's office says, they were very aggressive in using Chris Kobach's list. I'll say aggressive. Donald Trump supposedly won Michigan by 10,700 votes. Well, if you remove 50,000 minority votes, accusing them of voting twice, that's how Trump won the state of Michigan. Ohio, North Carolina, Arizona, these important swing states, the voter rolls were gutted, were swept clean of people with names like Jose Rodriguez, Maria Hernandez, David Kim, James Brown. If 2 people were named, if there's a guy named, in fact, not if, there was a guy in Atlanta named James Brown. Believe it or not, there's a guy in Motown, Detroit named James Brown. Both were on the hit list, subject to having their votes removed. This is just the beginning of what Kobach is about to do now as the official inquisitor for Trump's voting commission. And you have to understand, it's not just to prove in their Fox way that Trump actually won the popular vote. And we all, that's been called nutty and crazy. What's more important and more dangerous is that he will be making recommendations on changing the law so that it will become excruciatingly difficult to register to vote, including, for example, he's pushing very hard on this commission for proof of citizenship in order to register. Now, it might sound, by the way, Tom, that might sound, reasonable. You should be an American citizen if you're going to vote. But they don't have proof that we have droves of Mexicans swimming the Rio Grande to vote for Hillary Clinton or anyone else. Not many illegal aliens sign up to vote.
Well, in fact, most of the ones who have been busted have been Europeans who voted for Trump, haven't they?
Yeah, I don't know of actually only 2 convictions for aliens voting in America. Because you go to the can for 5 years. An Austrian voted for Jeb Bush. He admitted to that and got 10 years in prison, which will be followed by deportation. So you don't have millions of people doing this, but you will have hundreds of thousands, and that's no exaggeration, hundreds of thousands of people blocked from registering because they can't prove their citizenship. By the way, your driver's license, aliens get those. Social Security card, aliens get those too. You better have a passport or your, original birth certificate. In Kansas, where they took this Jim Crow operation for a test drive, citizenship proof, 14% of all new registrants in the state of Kansas were turned away because they didn't have the right proof of citizenship. That is the original birth certificate or passport. And remember, who has passports? It ain't your homeboys who've just come home from their vacation in the Alps. This is a brilliant and devious and destructive way to cleanse the voter rolls of voters of the wrong color.
And the wrong income status.
Yeah, the incomes. Remember, when we talk about Jim Crow voting, we have to remember that Jim Crow tactics, vote theft is just class war by other means.
Yep. Yeah, it's go after minorities, go after young people, go after older people, go after poor people, go after people who live in cities who don't drive, and I'm of the Greg, reality check this for me. I'm of the opinion that if this has been a 30-year campaign. I mean, we've played. You and I have heard it over and over and over again. The clip of what's his name saying, "I don't want everybody to vote. In fact, our leverage goes up as the voting populace goes down."
Yes, from the Heritage Foundation, right?
Yeah, the guy who helped found the Heritage Foundation. What's his name? Paul Weymouth. That's right. Yeah.
Way right.
So, I mean, that was in 1980, right? That was during the Reagan campaign. They've been, Rehnquist made his chops in Arizona, standing in the Native American areas and the Hispanic areas, 6'3" guy, challenging voters and scaring the hell out of them, running them off. So this has been a long going thing. But I would assert that without this Jim Crow, without this, and I don't want to minimize Michelle Alexander's version of Jim Crow, by the way, which is the classroom to prison pipeline, and the disproportionate imprisonment of people of color, which is another dimension of it, because then they lose their right to vote in many states. But I would assert that if we had the same voting standards that we had in the 1950s when we had no crisis, that the Republican Party would have virtually no power right now. Do you think I'm right?
Well, except for the Jim Crow states didn't let black folks vote. But yes, if we, before the big change was the elimination of the Voting Rights Act segments.
By the Supreme Court, by John Roberts and friends.
You wouldn't have Trump as president. There's no question whatsoever, because when we're looking at these numbers, the 1.1 million people removed by crosscheck, for example, and there 200,000 voters could not vote in Wisconsin in this election. Mostly, again, poor voters, voters of color, students. You could use a gun ID, but not your student ID in Wisconsin to vote. And the result was that with 200,000 people blocked, Trump won by about 23,000 votes. So, yeah, you'd have a very, very different electorate. You'd have, by the way, a very different Democratic Party, too, because you'd have a very different primary electorate. What I'm really worried now, by the way, with Kobach, is he said something on Fox News yesterday, which is unbelievably disturbing. He says, now with this federal appointment, I will have access to all the federal records of Homeland Security to hunt for people who are alien voters on our voter rolls. Now, if he does it the way he did crosscheck, if he finds some guy's been deported who's named Jose Hernandez, Jose Hernandez's nationwide are going to find their votes challenged. This is the big danger. This is what he did with crosscheck. Now he's moving into the alien voter business after doing the double voter scare. Now it's the alien voter scare. And again, you're right. This is another one brought up by President Trump. That the aliens are swimming the Rio Grande to vote in our elections. But again, they'll prove it. They keep making these claims that we found a match of names. They claim that they use birth dates. They claim that they use social security numbers. They claim that they use middle names. But you know what? They matched, for example, this is a real example, James Edward Brown in one state said he's the same voter as James Thomas Brown in another state. James Brown Jr., James Brown Sr., father, son, supposed to be the same voter. If they're going to now do this type of sophisticated matching with alien voters off the deportation list, look out.
Yeah, and you combine that with gerrymandering, and here we have a country being run by a small group of right-wing cranks.
Don't forget, the Democrats won the congressional vote. They just lost Congress because of gerrymandering. I'm not pumping here for rooting for the Democratic Party by any means, but I'm telling you right now that yes, we would not have a GOP Congress right now if you simply count the votes.
Greg, we have 30 seconds left. Why do you think that the American press, particularly the supposedly unbiased press like NPR, don't ever discuss this topic? Why doesn't the Democratic Party ever discuss this topic?
You cannot challenge the myth of the wonder of American democracy.
It's that simple?
You can't challenge the myth. I think that's the core of it. That's the absolute core of it.
Wow.
And also it's a racial issue. And, black news ain't no news. Yeah. If they were removing voters at country clubs, believe me, it would be all over National Petroleum Radio.
Oh, I agree. And Joy Reid will talk about it, and we'll see how long her days are numbered at MSNBC. Good point. Good points all. Greg Palast. Greg, thanks a lot. It's always great talking with you. You're the man. GregPalast.com. Thanks, Greg. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls after this. And welcome back, Peter in Harmony, Rhode Island, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Peter, what's up? Peter? Peter, you got to listen to your phone, not your TV. There's a delay. Rick, or not your internet. Rick in Weston, West Virginia. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind?
Hey, Rick, how you doing? You know, I think besides you, Noam Chomsky, Richard Wolff, some forward-thinking economists, and a few other people, you know, the rest of it's BS. I just recently read this book. I don't know if you ever heard of the book, but I know you know the author, and I always saw, you know, NPR. Garrison Keillor. He's got a hardback book about 3/4 of an inch thick. It's called The Homegrown Democrat, and that's what it's all about. You know, ever since 1945, now correct me if I'm wrong on this statistic, in 1945, for every dollar an individual taxpayer paid, the corporation paid $1.50. Now it is for every dollar you and I pay, and I'm sure you pay more because you're economic, whatever.
I'm doing okay.
Yeah, I got you, Manny. I'm glad you are, because it takes money to do something about this country.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not getting rich, but I'm doing okay. So,
Yeah,
but back to your point.
But for every dollar we pay now, the corporations only pay a quarter. That's why our infrastructure, our public schools, and all the basic commons are falling apart, and they want to blame it on the system of democracy. You know, when FDR revised the government, let's face it, in my book, FDR saved this country.
Oh, yeah.
They've been trying to turn the page back, and they, you know, the idea of Reaganomics, economics, trickle-down economics, working 40 years later when they didn't work then, and when I was at the top of my peak earning career, it's not going to work now. It's all a bunch of, and you got to wake the people up. When only maybe a third of the people are eligible to vote, even bother to vote, never mind voter suppression, gerrymandering the districts, the constant stream of psychological propaganda, and they exploit fear. It's hard to maintain a democracy. It takes a little bit of work.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, Rick. With regard to the numbers on the taxes, I've never seen the here's how much you pay, here's how much the company pays, but I do know these numbers. And that was that during the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s, about a third, a little over a third, I think it was 34% of all federal income came from corporate taxes. Right now it is between 6 and 8%, depending on how you calculate it.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Say back in Eisenhower's time, which was, you know, the two greatest Republican presidents of the last century were Eisenhower and Teddy Roosevelt, hands down. And I really did.
They were the only two honest Republican presidents.
And I believe Nixon was the last one that had any type of conscience. You know, he lost two brothers to tuberculosis. A lot of people don't realize he was the first one to put forward a single-payer national health care system.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of people don't realize 1970, 71, 72, they stopped the draft in, September 73.
Yep.
The country was in a freaking uproar.
Yep.
You know, and what's it going to take? But I can tell you this. I'm a progressive socialist Democrat. My whole family is. We live in Appalachia, but we're originally from the metropolitan area back in the 50s and 60s. We moved up here before it got too crowded down there.
Yeah.
So I went to integrated, when I was in first grade in 1961, I was in integrated schools.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, Rick, you're living in God's country. I've been to West Virginia. It's beautiful. But thanks a lot for the call. I spot on. I'm totally with you on everything. Thanks. Hey, are you?
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our pearly gate rebels today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Deb in Fairfield, California. Hey, Deb, what's on your mind today?
Hey there, love. Welcome home.
Thank you.
Very glad to have you back.
Thank you.
And one issue of concern for me is when I hear anyone on any side of whatever this crud is, anyone in the United States to believe that Russia's mafia-type control over the U.S. government processes is a problem from the past, because it's been going on. They keep on telling us it's going on. If you pay any attention, it's still going on. And look what happened the other day in the Oval Office.
I think we have a worldwide oligarch problem, Deb.
I think you're right.
And it's not just Russian oligarchs, and it's not just U.S. oligarchs. It is a worldwide oligarch problem.
The other thing is that I think we do a disservice to those of us and you who work so hard for progressive movements, not to mention the cross-check. Thanks so much for having Greg Palast on, because when we think of this weird kleptocracy that it feels like it's brand new, but it was, a year and a half in the making. If you look at Sarah Kendzior's Twitter feed and you go back a year and a half, she said what was going to happen. It was like, oh, gosh. But so the point I wanted to make, actually, when I originally called, was in order to protect our First Amendment free speech rights, to protest or even to laugh at someone in public, we were hoping that we could all pull together and support, it was Saturday Night Live at first, then it was Stephen Colbert. Now all of a sudden it's Lawrence O'Donnell is being worked by. Trump is working Andrew Lack now.
Yeah, Andy Lack telegraphed that a year and a half ago when he said that they were doing away with the lean forwards thing and that they were going to start hiring conservatives, and MSNBC was going to become
that's the 6-year plan back in 2010 when they purchased the station and just boom, goodbye Keith.
Comcast, the family that owns the majority of the stock in Comcast is, from what I've read, an extremely conservative group. And even if they weren't, when you've got these very, very, very large corporations that are essentially monopolies or duopolies or triopolies, but functionally monopolies, they're not interested in what we might call progressive issues. They're interested in financialization. They're interested in what are referred to as conservative issues. But I'm telling you, it's always just about money and power. It has nothing to do with William F. Buckley. It has nothing to do with Barry Goldwater. It has nothing to do with the classic Russell Kirk, the classic traditional ideas of conservatism. Conservatism is dead. Conservatism is just it's a label now to say a shill for the billionaires. Deb, spot on. Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction. We fight wars all over. This is from the last chapter, chapter 6, titled Staving Off Extinction. We fight wars all over the world for oil, and we don't even need it. That in and of itself is insane. But when you look at a 250-million-year-old piece of sedimentary rock and see that it's virtually barren of fossilized life forms, you realize that this is a hell of a lot more important than whether or not our country is going to fight stupid wars in far-off lands so the oil companies and the Koch brothers can continue to get rich. This is about the survival of life on this planet, at least as we know it. To hold back extinction, the human race must immediately limit carbon emissions. There are a number of ways to do this. To start with, governments around the world can simply set a limit on carbon emissions and begin fining businesses that pollute beyond that cap. If we want to make it more politically palatable and throw in some profit for the banksters who own so many of our politicians, we could also let businesses and banks set up an exchange and trade carbon credits. Businesses can buy the right to pollute or sell the consequences of their good behavior. In that way, the banksters get to skim a piece off the top, just like they've managed to do with pretty much everything else. This is our best chance to stave off extinction. However, it's politically impossible, at least for now. Although as the consequences of global warming further manifest themselves, political will for a hard cap will undoubtedly build, just like it did with sulfur dioxide that caused acid rain back in the 1980s. It's rarely discussed in the press, but President George Herbert Walker Bush successfully pushed through a cap-and-trade program for sulfur dioxide, which radically curbed acid rain. It's to buy humanity time in the short term, we may have to settle for a more modest proposal, such as a carbon tax. The concept is simple. Put a price on pollution. Under a carbon tax system, a business would pay, for example, $20 for every metric ton of carbon that they spew into the air. As of 2013, 33 countries and 18 smaller jurisdictions around the world have already put some sort of a price on carbon. In February of 2013, China, the world's largest polluter of carbon, announced plans to implement a carbon tax themselves. And the European Union runs a carbon cap-and-trade system. In 2010, Congress nearly passed a comprehensive cap-and-trade law that would have kept carbon emissions at a rational level and required businesses that wanted to pollute beyond the limits to buy carbon credits on the market from other businesses that were polluting below the level. Though that measure died by a Republican filibuster in the Senate, elsewhere around the world, carbon taxes are flourishing. Alongside the EU's cap-and-trade system, several other European nations are also taxing carbon. They include the nations of Scandinavia, the UK, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Ireland. Other like-minded countries include Costa Rica, which funnels tax revenues from carbon polluters to indigenous communities to help fight deforestation. South Africa, where new auto sales include a carbon tax, and full-scale carbon tax across most other industries have already been implemented. And India, which has a carbon tax of 50 rupees per ton on coal produced or imported into India. South Korea and Japan have also passed carbon tax measures. Several provinces in Canada have carbon taxes. And here in the United States, there are local carbon taxes in San Francisco, Boulder, and Montgomery County, Maryland. While quietly, business leaders and even Republican lawmakers are coming around to the idea of extending a nationwide carbon tax. For a moment, consider exactly what big oil is doing to our planet and how much money they are making in the process. The 5 biggest oil companies in the world, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, and ConocoPhillips, dump roughly 1 billion pounds of carbon into our air every single day. A modest carbon tax that would cut their daily profits by about $10 million and still total for them a staggering $332 million in profits every day is something they can afford as one part of a comprehensive energy policy. It's the bare minimum that carbon polluters should be paying, considering the damages they're inflicting on our planet. Pollution costs, like global warming, are called externalities. These externalities also include the medical costs of increased asthma and cancer care associated with 1 billion pounds of pollution being burned into the air above our communities every single day. They include the costs of ecological devastation caused when oil rigs explode in the Gulf of Mexico or tankers run aground and spill open off the coast of Alaska. They also include the military costs of deploying armies around the world to ensure that the oil spigots in hostile regions keep flowing and the shipping lanes remain open. And they include the costs associated with climate change, costlier storms, rising sea levels, flooding, and agricultural devastation. Carbon polluters themselves pay for few, if any, of these externalities, but instead they try to pass the bill along to all of us affected by their pollution. That needs to change to prevent disaster. When the day comes that businesses know pollution is at their expense, they will begin to reduce their carbon emissions. Capping carbon levels alone won't work. Research out of the MIT Global Change Institute assumed a $20 tax per ton of carbon pollution, increasing 4% every year, and found that it would only modestly curb emissions. This carbon tax scenario falls well short of even the White House's goal of cutting carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. And it would come nowhere close to staving off the projected temperature increases that could take our planet over the extinction tipping point. So a carbon tax needs to be part of a broader plan that not only eliminates incentives for the use of carbon-based fuels, but altogether phases them out and replaces them with new, cleaner energy alternatives. This will require massive government investment in research and development. It's basically calling for a new Manhattan Project. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction by Thom Hartmann.
Want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Russell in Hickory Hills, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Russell, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I'd like to have you comment on two things. First, it went viral over the weekend. Lindsey Graham just waylaid it on our site about the hatred and the venom and the disrespect that we're showing Donald Trump. He says, you know, I've never seen this. He said, for 8 years, we've bent over backwards to be respectful to Obama and work with this guy. And you people on the left just show this viciousness. You know, it's like, come on, I must have missed those 8 years of you guys stopping. You lied and the 400 bills and Marco Rubio calling every judge, stopping every executive order. But they were very respectful to Obama. But they can't understand why we're disrespectful to Donald Trump. I don't know why any of you guys ever give Lindsey Graham any credit. He's a right-winger. And
Lindsey Graham has never been on this program and probably never will, Russell. He will only go, let me finish this. He will only go on media that he knows will not challenge his BS. And I will not let people get away with lying to me, which is why it's very rare that there are Republicans who will come on this program, elected Republicans. And you know, and I tip my hat to some of the right-wing think tank guys who will come on and let me challenge them. And they'll put out their stuff and they'll let me challenge them. But I respect that. But Lindsey Graham is a wimp. And as far as I can tell, all the elected Republicans, Steve King, you know, the crazy Republican from Iowa, he used to come on this program regularly and let me debate him. But, you know, then apparently didn't work out all that well for him. And now he won't even come on the show anymore. These guys are just, they're professional cowards. They're living in their bubble.
Did you see the other thing was your boy Bernie popped up in West Virginia.
Yeah.
He found a girl. Her father's the president of the mining or the president of the union. You have to look at it. He said he's had enough of Joe Manchin, and they're primarying Joe Manchin.
Oh, Bernie's supporting a primary challenger to Joe Manchin?
She's a female. I don't know if her father owns the mining company or her father was the president of the mining company. I didn't get the whole detail. But they're primarying Joe Manchin. They said they've had all they're going to take of that guy.
That's very interesting.
They said
Troy, who is from West Virginia and follows West Virginia politics pretty closely, says he thinks that her father was actually a miner. But whatever it may be, if Bernie's supporting somebody, that's in my mind, that's a seal of approval. But you know, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. You know, what can I say? Russell, thanks for the call. Joe in DeKalb, Illinois. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me this time?
Just fine. Yeah, it sounds a lot better. Thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Sure, love you. Basically, I come from a town that's about an hour west of Chicago. It's kind of a rural town. I grew up, you know, knowing guns, feeling comfortable with guns. It wasn't part of my childhood growing up, but it was around. But it's gotten to the point now where I'm scared, not of my own government, but of what might possibly happen. And it's one of those things where I hate to sound like one of those preppers or crazy people or something like that, but I've
what is the what might happen that concerns you?
Honestly, it's what our president might do to kind of flip the switch, I guess you would say, to other countries, you know, being radical towards us in that respect. And it's one of those things where I hate to come across as a crazy person or anything, but because I'm not. I'm a pretty low key person, but it's come to the point now where I'm starting to think that something big might happen.
Yeah.
And it's kind of out of our control, and I'm doing everything that I can, you know, to feel more at ease, I guess I could say.
Joe, I share many of your concerns. I wrote a book, The Crash of 2016, which was probably poorly titled. It should have been The Crash of the Second Decade of the 20th Century. But in any case, because nobody's buying it anymore because it says 2016, but it really isn't about 2016. It's about how all this got to be where it is. And with credit to Steve Bannon, he read this book, The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe, and so did I. And we both took largely the same message from it, which is these 80-year cycles of history where about every 80 years you get a Great Depression followed by a war. Now, what you do about that, I'm guessing he and I have very different opinions. He wants, well, I'm not even want to characterize what Bannon wants to do, but what I would want to do is have as progressive a government as possible, in a position ready to do something about it. But I don't disagree with you that Donald Trump is a bull in a china shop when it comes to foreign policy. He's embracing autocrats around the world. His most recent is Erdogan in Turkey. The guy in the Philippines, Duterte. I mean, this is terrible. These are evil killers. The country, people complain about, China and Russia and whatnot. The country with the most journalists in jail is Turkey. And Trump is calling him up, congratulating him on a giant power grab that's going to decrease the power of the free press in Turkey. There's a great special on the BBC on this very topic that I watched in a hotel room in Tromsø, Norway. But you're not seeing this in the United States.
And that's one of the things that I'm mostly concerned about is when you're talking about Duterte and Erdogan, like being quote-unquote buddies with Trump, where we're going to start seeing these kind of leaks in the sieve, I guess you would say.
I don't think they're just buddies. I think they're role models.
And that's the reason that I'm concerned. It's one of those things where
Me too.
I have a couple of young daughters, and I don't want them to have the mentality you need to be scared of your government and who's in charge. But this guy is. I mean, my daughter's one of those ones that when Trump comes up on the TV, she's like, "Oh, yeah, I can't believe we're watching this. Why is this guy?" I mean, she's 6 years old, and I mean, she already understands that he's.
Keep in mind, Joe, we are 120 days into his presidency, more or less.
Yes.
Hubris almost always, there's a reason why that old cliche is a cliche. Pride goeth before the fall. Hubris almost always defeats itself in the end. Trump could get away with this stuff when he was a small-time businessman running a small, privately owned company, family-owned business that was not publicly traded and so did not have to answer to stockholders or to regulators. He cannot do this as president of the United States. He is just now beginning to realize this, and it is freaking him out. And, I think that this is going to backfire on him. I think it's going to backfire on the Republican Party. I think the mask has been taken off. The last mask to go is the one that the television networks are working very, very hard to maintain. I turned on the news this morning, and what do I see but an ad for Koch Industries, followed by an ad for ExxonMobil. I'm watching the fossil fuel industry doing everything they can to maintain to keep the networks' mouths shut and to keep the politicians in place. The tobacco industries played this game 30 years ago. It didn't work for them ultimately. Yeah, they made trillions in the process and killed millions and millions of people, but ultimately we won out. Ultimately, we're going to win out, Joe. Truth does win out.
Here's case in point. As I live in a district in Illinois where Adam Kinzinger is our congressional representative right now, and I've talked to him on the phone several times before.
I don't know anything about him. Who is he? Is he a Democrat or Republican?
He's a Republican.
Okay.
We are an hour west of Chicago, and I actually live in DeKalb, which is pretty. We had the largest turnout for Bernie in the entire state of Illinois.
Yeah.
In DeKalb, Illinois. So it's a very liberal town, but Adam Kinzinger is our representative in our district, and he's run unchallenged in the last two elections. We finally
you got to change that.
Yeah. So we finally have a person that's going to be running against him in the next election, which I'm very excited about. And the more that I learn about him, the more I like him. He's also a young guy, in his 30s, something like that. But it's one of those things where things are starting to turn, and I think even the established people, in the farming community around us are starting to realize that the status quo is not going to float the boat here.
Yeah. And that they've been had. I mean, it's just people are figuring out they've been had. Joe, it's as you know, as Thomas Jefferson said, and it's an old sexist phrase, but he said the day of witches will pass. You know, because this is a game where principles are at the stake. Are at stake. And Joe, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls. We're going to check in with Talk Media News, and our third hour, I think, is completely open. Just I've got some news stories to tell you, talk with you about, and we'll take your calls. And welcome back. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann. First, quick question. Did you happen to visit the seed bank in Norway?
I was surrounded by a fjord at Tromsø, but we flew into Oslo, which is inland. And so we saw it from the plane, but no, I didn't get to the ocean itself.
Okay, second question. The last one. I think Don, the earlier caller, was correct about the Iroquois Nation and the Council of Elders. Forget the Electoral College. Do you ever see a time where instead of Wall Street thinking 3 months ahead, will we get back to that point where, like the Iroquois Nation, where we care about all of our people 7 generations ahead and not just the worldwide bunker-building rich generations preparing only for their own future generations? Thanks, Tom.
No, good points, Michael. And the one thing that if my brain wasn't so jet lag fogged, I would have remembered and said to Dawn, and if Dawn, if you're still watching, you know, thank you for the call. Your comment was well taken. Was that the Council of Wise Elders among the Iroquois, at least among 5 of the 6 Iroquois nations, the original 5 of the 6 Iroquois nations, were made up entirely of women. And if we were to, and I think it's interesting that Mr. Macron in France, even though he just picked a right-winger as his prime minister, which I think is not a good sign, but, you know, who am I to say? He has put up a legislative slate that is 50% women. This is a big deal. And, you know, if the Council of Wise Elders was 50 or more % women, then, you know, I mean, that's what the Senate is supposed to be, right, with the 6-year terms. Then I'd have a lot more confidence in it. But I'm telling you, testosterone is the most dangerous drug in the world. It is responsible for more wars and more death and more destruction than any other compound. You know, more than serotonin, more than dopamine, more than, you know, I mean, we could go through the list of neurotransmitters. But, I mean, this is actually a hormone, but testosterone is the dangerous one. And so if Dawn, I would heartily support Dawn's suggestion if we did it the way the Iroquois did it. Michael, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. Scott in Canaan, Maine. Excuse me. Hey, Scott, we got a minute to the break. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Welcome back to the asylum.
Thank you, Scott. Well said.
I've got a couple of questions real quick. In reference to, I think it was 2011, Obama, and this is with the press. We don't have a free press anymore. Obama passed a law in the middle of the night that made it legal for the government to literally propagandize us. That's what the bill said, to propagandize us, which means in my world to lie to us. I need to know what you think about that. Second thing I need to know, I'll save my last one for last because that's the most important. The Senate, the Congress, and the president no longer fear the people. They forget who they work for.
No, they fear the billionaires who support them. That's it, Scott.
And my last one real quick, Tom, is who was the president that said every 9 years we need to have a revolution?
It was Thomas Jefferson, but he said every 19 years. It's Thomas Jefferson, every 19 years. He defined a generation as 19 years and said every America should have a small R revolution every 19 years. He was not talking about guns, though. Thank you, Scott. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, The Elements of a Great Working Life, new book by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us is Victoria Jones. Hey, Victoria. How are you?
Hey, Thom, I'm well. How are you?
I am kind of stoned from jet lag, but other than that, I am happy to be home.
I know that feeling so well.
Yes. Somebody earlier said, welcome back to the asylum. I'm like, okay, yes. So what's in the news today?
The Syrian government has constructed and is using a crematorium inside its notorious Sednaya military prison outside Damascus to clandestinely dispose of thousands of prisoners it continues to execute daily inside the facility.
Oh, God, shades of Auschwitz.
Yeah, at least 50 prisoners a day are executed in the prison, some in mass hangings, said Stuart Jones, the acting Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East. A recent Amnesty International report called Sednaya a human slaughterhouse and said that thousands of Syrians have been abducted, detained, and exterminated there. Jones said that the government of President Assad has carried out these atrocities and others seemingly with the unconditioned support from Russia and Iran, his main backers. He said the information came from human rights and non-governmental sources as well as intelligence assessments, and he released overhead photos. Russia, Jones said, has either aided in or passively looked away as the regime has engaged in years of mass murders and other atrocities. And he also said that during last week's meeting in Washington with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that Russia must now, with great urgency, exercise its great influence over the Syrian regime. And the Washington Post is saying that Jones's remarks made in a special State Department briefing were notable not only for their substance, but in the harsh language used to call on Russia to take action.
Wow. I'm guessing that the vast majority of these people being killed are Sunnis as well.
I would think so. I would think they would be, very likely.
Yeah. Huh. Okay, what else is up?
The Supreme Court today announced that it would stay out of a fight over a restrictive North Carolina voting law. So the move left in place a federal appeals court ruling that struck down key parts of the law as an unconstitutional effort to, quote, target African Americans with almost surgical precision.
Baruch Hashem. Thank God. That's a good... So they failed to get cert. They couldn't get 4 votes for the court to hear it? Was that the deal?
They couldn't get 5.
5 votes. It takes 5 votes for cert?
That's apparently what I'm reading here.
Okay.
They couldn't get enough. Also, Chief Justice John Roberts issued a statement noting that there was a dispute about who represented the state in the case, and that nothing should be read into the court's decision to decline to hear it.
Okay, so it might have been more technical on the grounds.
Yeah, I think it got a bit murky towards the end as to who was representing the state.
Yeah.
But it's quite extraordinary. The voter ID provision, for example, retained only, this is a quote, retained only those types of photo ID disproportionately held by, and excluded those disproportionately held by African Americans.
Yeah. I remember the case.
Said, even though the state had failed to identify even a single individual who has ever been charged with committing in-person voter fraud in North Carolina, but it did find that there was evidence of fraud in absentee voting by mail, a method used disproportionately by white voters. The legislature, however, exempted absentee voting from the photo ID requirements.
Because it's used principally by white people. Amazing. Amazing. What else is up?
Very interesting. President Trump today blasted those who subject police officers to, quote, hostility and violence, while promising to draw a bright line in the sand to protect law enforcement across the country. He was at an event on the Capitol steps at the National Peace Officers Memorial Service. Our police have been subject to unfair defamation and vilification, and really you see what's going on, even worse, hostility and violence. He said, this is quite interesting, he said, you're entitled to leadership at the highest level that would draw a bright line in the sand, not a red line in the sand that isn't gone over, but a bright line in the sand, and we will protect you. Trump called it a personal priority to help foster respect for law enforcement, criticizing those who use the, quote, reckless words of incitement that give rise to danger and give rise to incitement.
I'm assuming the red line was a phrase to Obama's Syria comment. It was a dig at Syria. Did he also use this as an opportunity to point out that he won the Electoral College and had the biggest inauguration ever?
The story I have got actually does not mention that, but it's a brief story. The stories are still coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, there's a post on Medium today of an interview with President Obama from just before he got the JFK Award, in which he talks about the Syria red line in the sand and talks about how hard it was to send troops into harm's way. But he said, but I actually think that the issue that required the most political courage was the decision not to bomb Syria after the chemical weapons use had been publicized, and rather to negotiate them, removing chemical weapons from Syria. He said it wasn't a slam dunk, but I thought it made sense for a variety of reasons for us to see if we could actually try to eliminate the prospect of large-scale chemical weapons than the political expedience of a one-time shot.
Oh, to have an articulate, thoughtful, and intelligent president again. Anyway, what else is up?
House Budget Committee Chair Representative Diane Black, Republican of Tennessee, says she hopes to get changes in Medicaid payments into next year's budget. She said Medicaid has a faulty foundation. And she also said that Medicaid may not be the only entitlement program on the chopping block. Friday, Speaker Paul Ryan said the resolution would include reforms to Medicare. And he said, I'm pretty sure the Budget Committee in the House will advance that through the House Republican budget that we will pass. They're also mulling cuts to means-tested mandatory spending, welfare programs, as they look to slash spending. Apparently they're looking to cut all kinds of things like food stamps, any number of things, veterans benefits, you name it.
How are these Republicans reconciling cutting Medicare and Medicaid with Donald Trump's repeated promises on the campaign trail that he would never touch them?
Well, this is very interesting because apparently they just are. And this sort of dovetails with a number of stories that have been coming out in the last few days, how they are just not afraid of him anymore.
They're not afraid of Trump.
No.
In other words, even if Trump wants to defend Medicare and Medicaid, although he's indicated recently he's perfectly willing to cut Medicaid, even if he wanted to, they don't give a rat's ass. They're just going to run it right through and dare him to sign it.
They are willing to forge their own path on their agenda.
Right, which is support the billionaires and screw the average working people. It's amazing. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
Always great talking and great to be back. Thank you. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
He'd been a Massachusetts state rep. He'd worked for President Bush's father, Bush 41. When Bush 41 lost to Clinton, Andy felt that the transportation bill had done the president no good, and he disliked labor unions, and he disliked unions in general. We all kept up a tough front. Transportation unions lobbyist for the building trades, like Tim James, was very effective and helped the labor Republicans push back. Bush 43, though, kept putting up roadblocks at every step. He simply did not want a transportation bill that might support the unions. John Mica, Transportation Subcommittee Chair, during a private Republican caucus meeting, made the best statement of the day. John said, hell, the president doesn't think we need a bill. As he travels in cities by car, they stop all the traffic for his motorcade. He thinks there are no traffic problems. The streets are deserted. We all howled. So anyhow, there's just all these amazing inside stories about how Congress actually works. It's pretty grim. The book Sideswiped by Bob Ney.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with me. Mick Mulvaney out there. If you have diabetes, it's your own damn fault. All right, first, this is amazing. Joe McCarter, she does some just great writing over at Daily Kos. First, it was Rep. Mo Brooks of Alabama with his comparison of those people who live good lives, they're healthy, and having previous health existence through no fault of their own, versus the people who brought it on themselves and therefore don't afford or don't deserve affordable insurance. Now it's popular vote loser Donald Trump's budget director, Mick Mulvaney, who is doling out health care on the basis of virtue. He said, a top Trump administration official defended the American Health Care Act. It's so slick, you know. It was the ACA, the Affordable Health Care, the Affordable Care Act was Obamacare. So the Republicans named it something different, but with an almost identical acronym, so that the rubes, the Fox News watchers, wouldn't realize that the AHCA or AHCA was a different thing from the ACA. And so the Republicans, when they do their town halls, where they're pitching the billionaire pitch, you know, and trying to avoid pointing out that they don't give a damn about working people. Oh yeah, I'm all support. I'm in favor of the AHCA, and everybody's in their mind going, "Isn't that Obamacare?" Or no, that's not Obamacare, but that's something good, right? Yeah. A top Trump administration official defended the American Health Care Act, the GOP bill to repeal the Affordable Care Act, by arguing Thursday that it would take care of people who had pre-existing conditions without asking healthy people to pay for those who made poor choices. This is the exact quote from Mick Mulvaney, former Republican right-wing congressman. We have plenty of money to deal with. We have plenty of money to provide that safety net, so if you get cancer, you don't end up broke. And then talking about Jimmy Kimmel's son, who was born with congenital heart disease, and versus people who have diabetes, he said, that doesn't mean we should take care of the person who sits at home, eats poorly, and gets diabetes. Right. The American Diabetes Association would like Mulvaney to understand that diabetes doesn't work that way. I mean, a small percentage of cases, but by and large, no. This is bizarre. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind then?
Professor, I have a question for you. Is yesterday's Dixiecrat today's corporate Democrat?
I would think that yesterday's Dixiecrat is today's Republican voter who thinks of himself as middle of the road. I mean, the Dixiecrats basically were supportive of many Democratic, actually would be probably too liberal for the Republican Party. They were basically, correct me if I'm wrong, Morris, I'm no expert on this stuff, but my understanding was that
what... me, Professor, that's for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, was that the Dixiecrats were Southern Democratic voters who supported most parts of the Democratic Party, like the New Deal, the TVA, the WPA, the CCC, stuff like that, but they just wanted to make sure that black people didn't get jobs, black people didn't get to vote, and black people didn't get any government benefits.
That part I remember. Professor, I've got to make this comment, then I'm going to let you go. You know, it kind of hurts my ears when I hear you speak about your book, Screwed, The Undeclared War on the American Middle Class, published in 2006. The most important thing in that book is not what them old white guys thought. The most important thing is that in that book is how our voting has been privatized. Okay, that is number one. You're talking about what, that Boyd, ES&S, Sequoia. Remember Don Siegelman? That was the most, I couldn't believe what happened to that man. We've got to take machines out of our country and be able to verify our voting. Read about a guy named Brad Freeman. Just go online and read what Brad Freeman got to say. Okay?
Oh, Brad's an old friend. He's been on this program many times. By the way, Morris, did you
nothing, Professor, and that's why they're going to keep us down, because you know they tell us who we got to vote for, then they control the results. Until we can verify something, man, we ain't going to make no progress. What do you think of that?
I totally agree. Did you watch any of the television coverage of the French election?
No, sir. I did not.
It was an amazing thing to see. The people would walk up to what was essentially what looked sort of like a voting machine, and they would vote. And it would print out a piece of paper, and on the piece of paper, in big letters, you could see it. People would hold it up for the camera. You could see it, although most people just kind of folded it in half because they wanted it to be a secret ballot. It would say Macron or Mélenchon or Le Pen or whatever. It would say who they voted for. And then they would take that piece of paper, fold it in half, and drop it in a box. And then later on, they would empty a box over a table with a bunch of people sitting around it, and the people would open the papers and make little marks on paper and count them. And when they had the vote, and people from several parties, and when they had all the votes all tallied up on paper, then they would enter it into the computer.
That's nice.
Yeah. I mean, you know, they were using technology, but it was completely transparent. And it was just like, you know, why are we the village idiots? Well, because the billionaires run the agenda. I mean, it's just, there's no other way around it. Morris, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Well said. Rob in Milpitas, California. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. What's up is actually a great follow-on to Morris in Long Beach. He, a few weeks ago, talked about using the phrase verifiable elections. And again, you know, he brought up the subject. I'm calling because of the Democratic Convention for our state here in California has a resolution before it that speaks to this issue. It's called Election Protection Resolution, urging the Democratic National Committee to safeguard voting rights and protect the integrity of our elections. And I'm one of those folks that thinks that the DNC really has not been paying enough attention to these, and so our Democratic Party will have a chance to talk about this at the convention happening this weekend. So if people want to know more about this, they can go to Means for Democracy. That's Means, MEANS, for FOR, democracy.org. And right there at the top, there's a rigged elections button that will take you to the whole story and tell you that there's like going to be about 3,000 3,000 electors there, delegates, who have a chance to vote on this. And if you would like to get a hold of one of them, then there's some general instructions on how to find your way to somebody that you might know to be, just give them a tip. Oh, and before you cut me off, I want to say, I want to plug your podcast, because that is actually how I found you in the first place when my subscription to the Al Franken show was transferred over to your program. And it really makes it convenient because I can listen while I'm doing dishes, driving, brushing my teeth, whatever. So,
well, thank you, Rob. Thank you. It's one of the things that helps pay the salaries here. We all appreciate it. I got to just tell you a quick story. Back when I was with Air America, 2005, 6, whatever the year was, there were a group of Democratic senators and congressmen who got together with a bunch of the Air America talent. And we had this meeting here in Washington, D.C. It was about kind of Democratic strategy and media use and whatnot. And they listened to us and we listened to them. And I brought up this issue of election integrity. And at that point, it was, red shift on the machines, but it was still, why don't we have a voting system that's transparent? Why, with the 2002 Help America Vote Act, why did we privatize our vote? And that people are concerned about this. And there were 3 or 4 senators there whose names you would immediately recognize, at least 2 of them have run for president since then, and several members of Congress whose names and they were good people, good people. And what they said, and they said it pretty much right out loud, was we don't want to discuss this issue because we're afraid that it will discourage voters from voting. And we need as many people to vote as possible. And it was like this kind of circular logic. And then I was like, but if their votes don't count, why are you so worried about them getting, well, you just have to get more of them out there to vote, And it was like, I walked out of there feeling like banging my head against the wall. And that was more or less the official position of the Democratic Party up until the last year. And now the Democratic Party is starting to wake up to this stuff, and I think which I think is a good thing. And these kind of motions like what you're talking about there in California are pieces of that solution. And there are others who are working on it, the Young Turks and others, other progressive talk show hosts, some great websites that are working on this. MoveToAmend.org is working on it. Daily Kos is giving it a lot of publicity. Alternet has run a number of stories. Alternet.org, one of the best websites on the internet, run a lot of stories on this. So a lot of good stuff. Rob, thanks for bringing it up. Great to hear from you. Norris in Kindler, Louisiana. Hey, Norris, what's up?
Hey, glad to have you back.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
I hope your blood pressure didn't go up too high since you come back.
I'm drinking my beet juice, oddly enough. It's supposed to be good for you.
Sipping on it, yeah. Okay, I got an uncle living Beaumont, Texas, near Baytown, and recently Exxon Mobil lost a $21 billion lawsuit against people in the communities for global warming and carbon monoxide poisoning.
Wow.
And I haven't heard that on any news outlet, so I decided to let you know about that so you can check into it and spread the word.
What's the name of the town again, Norris?
It's Exxon Mobil in Baytown, Texas.
Baytown, Texas.
They lost a lawsuit, and they got to pay out $21 billion to people in the communities, surrounding communities.
Wow. Okay, I'll have to check that out. That's a good one.
News outlet, so most people in the other communities in other states should do the same thing before Trump blocked any further lawsuits in any state in America.
Before we get any more so-called tort reform. Yeah, I'm with you. Norris, thank you. It is so great doing this show and having the smartest listeners in radio. It is just absolutely spectacular. And did the local press cover this, Norris, or did this just kind of happen in a vacuum?
It happened in a vacuum, and my cousin from Opelousas, Louisiana, Sabres on KPLC out of Lake Charles, the television channel.
Right.
That they stated one time.
Just mention it once, yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't watch that channel. I watch your show and Democracy Now! Channel.
Yeah.
I don't watch the other outlets at all.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Norris. Thanks for the heads up and thanks for the information. If that's the actual case, and I can't vouch for it, I haven't seen it, but I will go looking for it. That's very, very good news. Norris, thanks a lot for the call, and we'll be back with more of your calls coming up on 18 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back from Norway and Germany with some great video footage. We're putting together a documentary on climate change for probably next spring. We'll have this thing come out. But boy, what I'm learning. It's good and scary.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, there actually is a lot of really good news with regard to climate change. And, of course, there's Trump and the Republicans and the billionaires. Welcome back. Rich, watching Free Speech TV in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks so much. Thanks for your globe trekking because, you're when you're out there doing that stuff, you're collecting information for us that's going to come along and make us smarter when we get to watch you in the next iteration of your work.
Hopefully. I also, the airline now has this thing where you can also pay a little extra to offset your carbon, which I did.
Oh.
So, anyway.
Cool. Well, I'm reminded of something that Joe Madison said several months back. Maybe even a year back. He said, "This is algebra. It's like P1 plus P2 equals R." And I thought, yeah, and Thom gives us the nomenclature, you know, and we're able to peer into stuff that would otherwise be just too muddy to get. So, you know, that's what you're doing for us.
Well, thank you.
I wanted to offer this as a data point. There was something on BBC, and then also, real quick, you are on XM 127, which is progressive, and I only just found out that progressive was there. The only thing that I had found in XM was looking for BBC radio at 120, and then one up from 120 was Insight, and that had some stuff on it because Stephanie Miller had Dean Obadala as a show there once upon a time. And it was only recently that I found your 127 on the dial. So,
well, thank you. I'm glad you found it. They've got I think 3 or 4 right-wing stations, and then they got us. But thank God they've got us. You know?
I didn't know about that because I got to hear Steph in the morning, and then you came along later, and I was like, well, now I know, and I can tune into that when I'm out in the world on the car trips.
Great. They also have an app. You know, you can listen to it on your phone too, or on your iPhone or whatever. You know.
You're on a broke little feature phone that's 9 years old and about to give up the ghost.
Good on you, Rich. Good on you. Oh my. Okay, is that the point you wanted to make?
One more, please. I actually have a point to this, and it is about the oligarchs and the global elites. And you can actually look at organizations like FIFA or the Olympic World. I can't remember. It's OIC, I think, is its acronym. But the guys that run the Olympics.
Yeah, it's the OIC.
These things are populated by oligarchs.
Actually, I think it's the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. But yeah, you're right. It's a bunch of billionaires. Yeah.
And it turns out that the FBI was able to get the one American on the FIFA Executive Committee. His name is Chuck Blazer, and he has an apartment in Trump Tower, and he was the mole on the Executive Committee for an FBI investigation. And they're going after, you know, the former head of FIFA, Sepp Blatter, for evil deeds. And the guys that run the Olympics, additionally, are potentially these evildoers at this above-the-law impunity. And all of this links into a BBC story about something that was called power centers, global power centers. And these are literal bricks-and-mortar locations in places around the world where these global elites come together in the same constellations repeatedly to share.
Rich, we're out of time. I'm sorry. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Rich was just calling and talking about the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and how they're going after Seth Blatter, I think his name is, or whatever. Sepp, and et cetera. And they're a bunch of oligarchs by and large. So it's okay to lie to the American people about global warming. It's okay to own politicians. It's okay to rig elections. But don't mess with our sports. We will nail your ass. That's what's going on. It's David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Thank you, Guru. It is good to have you back.
Thank you.
I would like to give you and your audience the natural remedy for airborne allergies, which with global warming are only going to get worse. And people who aren't affected yet may become affected because it's going to get so bad. So what you do is you get locally harvested honey. Locally harvested honey contains all of the pollens in your area, and when you take it the right way, it works like a vaccination.
That makes perfect sense.
And the protocol is 2 teaspoons a day for 2 weeks. Unfortunately, you have to do it every allergy season. 2 teaspoons a day for 2 weeks, locally harvested honey. I've been doing it for about 5 years because my allergies got worse in the past couple of years, and I've gone from sneezing dozens of times a day to sneezing once or twice, if that.
I'll have to try that. You know, since we moved to D.C., I've never had allergies in my life. And when we moved to D.C., everybody said, oh, you're going to get allergies. Everybody who moves to D.C. gets allergies. And sure enough, after I've been here, 7 years, I think now, and about 2 years ago in the spring, I started sneezing. But I don't know that anybody, well, there's got to be locally harvested honey around here, right?
It's easy to find. Whole Foods has it if you have one in your area.
Can you add it to lemon juice and stuff?
Well, you take it just 2 teaspoons.
But you can presumably it would work just as well if you made lemonade out of it, right?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't.
You're just chowing down it off the spoon.
Yeah.
Major sugar shock here.
I can also give you the remedy for colds if you'd like.
Okay, what's that?
I used to get 3 to 4 colds a year, every single year. I've had 1 cold in 7 years since I started doing nasal irrigation. You can do it with what they call a neti pot or
I'm familiar with it.
Saline fluid, but the way I do it is the cheapest and the best. Every day when I go into the shower, I take a cup with a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and you fill the cup with water and stir the salt, and you gently suck it into your nose and gently expel it so you don't blow out your eardrums, and you gently suck it into your nose and you gently expel it. You also gargle with it and swallow some of the gargle to get it deep down into your throat where the cold lives. And it's also great just if you have a stuffed up nose, even if you don't have a cold.
Yeah.
And every day I go in the shower, I do it 1 cold in 7 years.
You know, I'm sure somebody already needs to put together a book of these kind of folk remedies, because I'm guessing, David, that this is stuff that was common knowledge 200 years ago.
Oh yeah, it is.
And you know, and then they went on the crusades about, you know, get the witches out and stop the midwives and get rid of the, you know, the herbal doctors and the homeopaths and just replace it all with guys who do, you know, morphine, mercury, and penicillin. And yeah, David, thanks. Thanks for adding to my natural health database. I appreciate it. Great to hear from you. And thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. We will be back in just a moment with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. So glad to be back in the USA.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And yes, I really do think this is the greatest country in the world, and that's why I'm working so hard to take it back from these petro-billionaires.
And welcome back to Thom Hartmann University, to our book club. We're reading today from the last hours of Ancient Sunlight. And this is from page 60. The chapter is Extinctions, Diversity Supports Survival. The consolidation of power and wealth in the hands of a very few rich individuals and multinational corporations has made some businessmen and politicians rich, but it's also aggregating and wiping out resources. We're directly competing with every other form of life on the planet. As long as there was more out there to exploit, growth was possible. Now, as we approach the closed limits of our planet's capacities to generate food and process our wastes, sustainable growth has to be re-examined for the oxymoron it is. And even if nature doesn't kill us off, it seems that we're bent on doing it ourselves, or to ourselves. Pesticide use in the United States is up over 3,000% since World War II. Yet more pesticides doesn't mean fewer crops lost to insects. To the contrary, we're losing 20% more of our crops to insects than in 1945. But because of increasing insect resistance to pesticides and mechanized farming techniques, the pesticide industry has economically addicted many farmers to their product. Harmless species are disappearing, but no harmful insect species has been eradicated. But while the insects, who can evolve through hundreds to millions of generations during the period of a single human lifespan generation, are becoming immune to our pesticides, we are not. This leaves us vulnerable to the poisons that we ourselves manufacture to kill off another species. For example, in September 1997, the New York Times featured a story by reporter John H. Cushman Jr. titled, "Cancer in Kids Increases, New Toxins Suspected." The story chronicled how the rate of cancer among children in the United States has skyrocketed since the 1970s, when we were using far less than half of the agricultural chemicals we are now, to the point now where the odds are 1 in 600 of a child born today getting cancer before the age of 10. Childhood cancer has become the second leading cause of childhood death behind accidents and is now the most common fatal childhood disease, accounting for fully 10% of all childhood deaths. Since 1973, for example, rates of acute lymphoblastic leukemia increased 27% in boys and girls, and brain cancer is up 40% over the same period. 99% of all U.S. mothers' milk today contains detectable levels of DDT. In 1950, it was found that 0.5%, 0.5% of U.S. male college students were infertile. In 1978, a study found that number had skyrocketed to 25%. And in the past 32 years, the average American male's sperm production has dropped by 30%. Some researchers attribute this to the accumulation of chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides, which are often intended to render insects sterile, while others speculate that some plastics used in food packaging mimic the female hormone estrogen and may be demasculizing men and increasing the risk of breast and uterine cancer in women. But that's just the beginning of the problem. In 1960, routine feeding of antibiotics to farm animals was virtually unknown. Antibiotic administration to meat animals has increased so much since then, however, that today over 55% of all antibiotics manufactured in the United States are put into animals or animal feed. This has turned our livestock into a vast breeding ground for antibiotic-resistant microorganisms. The American pharmaceutical and meat industries don't consider this a problem, nor do the politicians to whom they contribute millions of dollars a year, and continue to support the routine administration of these drugs to dairy and meat animals. But that stance is hardly supported by any common knowledge in science. The European Economic Community, the common market, has banned American meat products grown with antibiotics. Why? The research which so concerned the Europeans showed that in 1960, only 13% of American human staphylococcus infections were resistant to penicillin. By 1988, however, the number of penicillin-resistant staph infections in Americans had exploded to over 90%. Muppets creator Jim Henson was killed by such a drug-resistant infection, for example, despite his substantial wealth and his access to the most sophisticated and expensive healthcare system in the world. And it's not just on land. Ocean studies specialist James W. Porter of the University of Georgia points to the explosion of human viruses and bacteria filling the water of the planet's oceans, killing off coral reefs and spreading disease among humans and other life forms. He projects that 20 to 30% of coral reefs are at risk, with a 446% increase in infections just since 1996 among the reefs he has been monitoring off the Florida coast. University of South Florida researcher Joan B. Rose points out that between 20 and 24% of all people swimming in Florida's coastal beaches become infected with viruses, which can cause heart disease, ear infections, sore throats and eyes, meningitis, gastrointestinal disease, hepatitis, and diabetes. About 1%, she says, become chronically infected. Similarly, a sampling of shellfish from New York waters found over 40% infected with human pathogens. And a sampling of water from the Waikiki Beach in Hawaii found that more than a third of the samples tested were infected with human viruses. At the same time, Vermont ice cream manufacturer Ben & Jerry's is suing the government. They want to put on the label of their ice cream that the milk they use is from cows free of synthetic growth hormones, and it continues with that sort of story. So this is just, one piece of the last hours of ancient sunlight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can support the Thom Hartmann Program and see video of our entire 3-hour show over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Dave in Huffman Estates, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. It's going to be kind of interesting when Turkish President Erdogan meets with Trump this week, as Turkey, they're pretty furious about the fact where the Trump administration had made a controversial move on arming this Kurdish militia
Right.
to fight Islam with a lot of sensitive U.S. weaponry and stuff like that. And in fact, there's the front page of a prominent Turkish newspaper. They're demanding the eviction of the U.S. troops and warplanes from Incirlik Air Base.
As a consequence of this, yeah. I would posit that one of the biggest mistakes that was made after World War I, or arguably even Potsdam after World War II, was not giving the Kurds a homeland. You know, the Kurds in southeastern Syria, northwestern Iraq. I'd have to look at a map to figure out where the rest of them are. But there's this, it used to be called Kurdistan. In fact, my old mentor, Godfrey Mueller, back in the 1930s, designed the flag that is used by the modern Kurdish independence movement. He was friends with the grandfather of that movement. And all of these efforts by the Kurds, by the Turks, by the Syrians, and by the Iraqis to prevent the Kurds from having their own homeland, although they're slowly kind of creeping in that direction, but it's an injustice that has been, 4, 5, 6 generations old.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the climate change, real quick. I read something somewhere where my heritage, the Finns, that they're in charge now or something, some council.
The Nordic Council, is that what you're talking about?
Something on climate change.
The Arctic Council? I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but the Finns are very concerned about this. The Norwegians, the Swedes, the Danes, because they're watching. Climate change is happening anywhere from 2 to 6 times faster in the Arctic than it is at these latitudes here, and so there's no debate up there.
Right, and then like you were talking earlier about the press, the Finns are like in the top 5 or something of being one of the most freest press in the world.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely true. And it's because they enforce their antitrust laws there. It's one of the reasons why Microsoft is getting in trouble in Europe with the European Union, is the EU wants to enforce their antitrust laws. But this goes, at the national level, particularly with the Scandinavian countries, they're very thorough about it. We saw, in the time that we were in Tromsø, we saw a Burger King and one other American restaurant. I'm trying to remember what it was. Might have been a Subway sandwich shop because they're locally owned franchises, And
all right, listen, let me
that was it.
On the side so you can get somebody else.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, then, Tom.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dave. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said you wanted to say one more thing. I could barely hear you. Pete in Espanola, New Mexico. Hey, Pete, what's up?
Hi, Tom. This is Pete in Espanola. I'd like to give kudos to Alex for the good show he did last week.
Amen. Thank you.
I'd like to raise the issue of the Democratic Party and the neoliberals, and I don't see this ever going to be a change until the influence of the neoliberals has been taken out of the Democratic Party and given back to the grassroots.
Broadly speaking, I don't disagree. I would phrase it a different way. I think that the neoliberal experiment, which was started what happened was in 1947, in September 1947, at Montpellier, France, either France or Switzerland, Friedman, I was going to say Thomas, Milton Friedman, and Friedrich von Hayek, and who's the third guy? Ludwig von Mises. Thank you, Troy. The three of them got together along with a fourth guy whose name is kind of lost to history and certainly lost to my brain. And they literally invented the phrase neoliberalism. And the theory was that government was always slow and incompetent, and the market was always fast and impeccable, that household work was women's work and shouldn't be considered as part of the economy, that the world, the planet, was a limitless resource and a limitless garbage deposit, and so we didn't have to assign value to that,
and that we only really had to concern ourselves with the relationship between consumers and producers, and that the more we could financialize our economy, the better. This was the core of this philosophy that they called neoliberalism. It is wrong on almost every account, and it was ridiculed in 47 when they started publishing papers, in 48, 49, 50. Russell Kirk, kind of shouts out to them in his book, The Conservative Mind, in 1951, but only in passing and almost like, a side-swipe compliment. Barry Goldwater rejected them by and large. William F. Buckley was very skeptical of them. They were viewed as they were somewhat embraced by the John Birch Society, but it was just way too much economics, right? And nobody really took them seriously until Ronald Reagan was elected. And when Ronald Reagan was elected, he surrounded himself with neoliberal economists, and Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, all this stuff. This is neoliberalism. And as Reagan went after the trade unions, which were the principal source of funding for the Democratic Party, and devastated them, there were people within the Democratic Party who said maybe we should adopt some parts of this neoliberal agenda. And that became the Democratic Leadership Council and the Third Way. And so both the Republicans and the Democrats have had their experiment, slightly different, but basically the same thing, with neoliberalism. It was also tried in Chile by Pinochet. It was tried in Russia by Yeltsin. It has been tried in a number of countries, and it has always failed to produce a democratic outcome. It has always produced what you might refer to as oligarchy. And it certainly has here in the United States. And Donald Trump, the reason why, in my opinion, the reason why he won the Republican nomination was because perhaps he wasn't smart enough to understand neoliberal theory, but he basically repudiated neoliberalism. Oh, the other cornerstone of neoliberalism that I forgot to mention was so-called free trade. And Trump said, screw that. We're not going to do free trade. We're going to do America first. We're going to do mercantilism. We're going to go back prior to neoliberalism. He didn't use these phrases, but everybody understood it. And when I saw that happening in the primary, I thought and I said on this program, he's going to eat the lunch of these Republicans because he's essentially running as a pre-neoliberal Democrat. And the Democrats who have succeeded Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, both in their campaigns, if you read Bill Clinton's stump speech, it was called A New Covenant. And if you listen to Barack Obama's stump speeches in 2008, they both were repudiations of neoliberalism. They rejected neoliberalism. Now, they didn't entirely govern that way, but that's what the American people want. They want an end to neoliberalism. And Trump is, rhetorically anyway so far, now he hasn't matched it with actions, but rhetorically, using his language, he has rejected neoliberalism, and I believe that is the only reason why 40% of Americans are still rock solid in their support of him. And if the Democrats, and Bernie Sanders rejected neoliberalism, and look at what happened there, and had the media covered it 18 months or 6 months, 8 months earlier, I think there's a good chance he would have. Well, who knows? I don't even want to go there, but. The point is that, number one, the media is never going to talk about this because the media has fully embraced neoliberalism, because at the core of neoliberalism is corporate control of government and of society. And the media now is these giant corporations. But secondly, as more and more Democrats and a few Republicans are starting to say, to hell with this neoliberalism stuff, we are not going to go down that road. It is a failed experiment. We're going to go back to our core principles, whether they be Barry Goldwater conservatism, with or without the racism on the Republican side, or whether it be FDR and Lyndon Johnson, Great Society, New Dealism. We're going to go back to fundamentals. Those people are starting and will continue to win elections. And that is in my opinion, the great hope for America. Pete, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The Mont Pelerin on Society, by the way, is still around, still promoting neoliberalism. And of course, you got Harold Ford Jr. and all his buddies at the former DLC still promoting neoliberalism. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Chris was just asking me, what's that Bush sticker behind you? It says Bush Cheney for prison. So, just FYI, but I'm gonna set it. Oh, and I've got a Ben Carson sticker here. Oh, you don't want to know the stuff that we accumulate here. Barbara in Zephyr Hills, Florida. Hey, Barbara, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hi. We listen to your program all the time. We really like you. That's the starter.
Thank you.
Secondly, I keep saying to my husband, you know what? I really have to phone Thom Hartmann because he probably could start something about all of this voter suppression, Wisconsin people having to have photo IDs and people taken off the roll because they don't have adequate IDs because they're too poor to get them. And they put a price tag on the ID so people can't get them.
Right, and you have to have your original birth certificate, which is, it can, in some states, when I got mine from Michigan, I think it was $80, and it took like 2 months, you know.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Anyways, my point is, I keep saying, with all the money that flows into the Democratic Party and all the money that's out there owned by Democrats, why doesn't somebody get up there and start something to get all of these people registered?
Oh, there's an enormous effort to do it. There's a few problems. In Florida, the League of Women Voters stopped registering voters because Rick Scott and the Republicans passed a law that said that if you turned in voter registrations that had any errors, now this could mean something like Barbara Ellen Johnson being listed as Barbara E. Johnson, right? If it had any errors, the person who filled out the form could personally go to prison for up to 5 years. And so the League of Women Voters stopped all their voter registration in Florida. There was a group called ACORN that was committed to, particularly in minority communities, registering voters. James O'Keefe went after them with a highly edited video, made it look like they were engaged in criminal activity. They weren't. It's been completely debunked. The man is a lying scum, or at least with regard to that particular event, and that's been fairly well established. But the Republicans in Congress destroyed ACORN. State after state after state, they are making it harder and harder for you to register voters. There are states, there are these ALEC laws, there are states that are adopting these laws that in order to register voters, you have to get a license, you have to get a permit, you're subject to all kinds of oversight, all in the name of preventing voter fraud. Pardon?
There's so many people don't drive. Why would they get a license? We watch people that walk up and down our street all the time. They probably can't afford a driver's license.
Well, not only that, Barbara, in a lot of states now, they won't even let driver's licenses be the criteria for your voter ID.
I mean, this is absolutely, to me, it's out of the, you know, I can't just understand all
this is this is a Republican voter suppression effort, pure and simple, nothing more, nothing less. It's been in the works since 1980.
It's disgusting that they should be able to get such a hold on voter rights.
You would think.
Can't vote.
You would think. We need an affirmative right to vote written into our Constitution. We need a constitutional amendment that says every American citizen has a right to vote, whether they're in prison, whether they're on probation, regardless of their color, regardless of their age, as long as they're 18 years old. Every American citizen should have the right to vote. Barbara, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Terry in Pahrump, Nevada. Hey, Terry, what's up?
One thing real quickly before I get to my main issue. You were reading about the San people. Or San, I'm not sure
Sami.
how it's pronounced.
S-A-M-I.
I read a book back in the
San.
70s.
You're talking, I'm sorry, you're talking from my book. Yeah, the Kung. It's S-A-N, San, yeah.
Okay. I read a book back in the 70s that said that all languages fit into 7 root languages except 2. And theirs was one of them, and the other one was the Basque language.
You're right.
And what's interesting about it is the book proposed that the Basque language might actually be a holdover from Neanderthal.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard that. Louise and I went to the Basque region when I was writing a book called Threshold. The last chapter of Threshold is all about the world's largest worker-owned co-op. It's called Mondragon, and which is the Mountain of the Dragon, which is right across the valley from it. So it's the name of the town too. And what we were told by the Basque-speaking people who lived there was that they believed that their language had come from Atlantis, that when Atlantis sank, the refugees from Atlantis went to Western Spain and became the Basques.
Well, this guy's belief was because if you look at where the vast majority of Neanderthal caves have been found, it's in the Dolomites and the Pyrenees and all those regions on the border of France and Spain.
Oh, that's
fascinating.
fascinating.
I just found that fascinating.
Yeah, I'd never heard that theory. That's a good one. That's a good one.
What I actually called for is I have been honored enough that the Green Party has asked me to run for assemblyman here.
Mm-hmm.
And I live in a county that's extremely conservative. There are more people that look like the Duck Dynasty people in one place than any place I've ever seen except maybe a Leonard Skinner concert. And I was hoping you might be able to give me a book to read. And the one thing that I am most worried about, and I want to be upfront about the whole thing, I am a convicted felon and I have been a drug abuser. So how do you what kind of information can you give me to put that thing out in a way that it's not going to hurt my chances?
You confess to it and you say you've learned from it, and hopefully you have. And I mean, it works better for Republicans typically, particularly with sexual indiscretions. Oh, I've sinned, okay, no problem, we'll give you a pass. I mean, look what happened to David Vitter, right, with the hookers.
Right.
But that's the classic strategy, is to say, yeah, I screwed up and I've learned from it. With regard to a book, I would encourage you to read George Lakoff's Don't Think of an Elephant and my book, Cracking the Code, which are both on political languaging. And my third piece of advice would be to try to collaborate with, to the extent possible, the Democratic Party, or at least try to make sure that your candidacy doesn't cause a Republican to get elected, if you understand what I'm saying.
Sure. Split the vote.
Yeah. Please don't. Right. Please don't. I realize if you're running as a Green, you're going to split the vote at a certain level, but hopefully it can be done in a way that doesn't produce that outcome.
Well, I knew at 10 that I was a socialist when I figured out that what's the one thing a smart person learns from Monopoly? Only
exactly.
One person can win.
Right. And one winner, everybody else loses. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Terry, great call. Good luck. I wish you the very best. I got to move along. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's up?
Tom, welcome back to the colony. We've been colonized by petrobillionaires, Wall Street, and all these oligarchs.
Thank you.
I just wanted to. I really think the reason why Comey got fired because he had a lead, and the lead was that transaction that happened in Florida, where Trump bought a mansion that he bought for $15 million, and he sold it to this Russian oligarch for $95.
Good.
And I think a lot of the transaction was handled by the Bank of Cyprus, in which Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, owned half, and the other half is owned by the Russian oligarch who bought the house. And the same bank that Manafort had 16 different bank accounts. And I think
Rachel Maddow did a show about that maybe 3 weeks ago.
Yes, that is correct. Yes, and I think the crime that Trump trying to cover is money laundering, because what he was doing basically just buying these apartments in New York, these houses all over the country, and basically legitimizing the money that these Russian oligarchs inherited.
Yeah. Well, he's hiding something, and it's in his tax returns. I'm telling you, he's hiding something.
Absolutely. Welcome back. Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Omar. Great to hear from you. Peter in Harmony, Rhode Island. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Can you hear me this time?
Just fine.
Okay, so I wanted to ask your opinion about the Koch brothers. So they're pretty old. One is 77, another one's 81. One of them has 3 kids. I think the oldest is 12 or 13. And we still have, legacy wealth and, transfer of wealth in this country, huge problem. So what do you think is going to happen once either one of them or when both of them kick the bucket? Who do you think is going to carry their mission to overtake the country with libertarian nightmare?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's not just the Koch brothers. You've got the Walton heirs. You've got, I mean, when the Koch brothers hold their meeting, their millionaire billionaire meeting, they typically get between 200 and 500 people who show up. You know, Donald Trump used to be part of the group, and so whether it's, I don't think there's such, you know, essential pieces of this whole thing that it's going to fall apart without them. We used to think that of Richard Mellon-Scaife. We used to think that about Joe Coors, you know, back when they helped found the Heritage Foundation back in the 70s and the 80s. And, you know, they've passed along, but, you know, the work continues. There's always going to be billionaires coming along behind them, particularly the petro-billionaires, who you know, are interested in maintaining this right-wing political thing. That's a question, though, to ask Jane Mayer. If you have not read her book, Dark Money, I strongly encourage you to get it. I think that you'll find the answer to all your questions there. Peter, thanks for the call. Jason in St. Louis. Hey, Jason, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you, Jason.
Question for you. What are your thoughts? I mean, I heard you say earlier that there's oligarchs all over the world, but particularly with this president, it appears that there are Russian oligarchs that are trying to influence, our presidency and our elections. And I find that you don't really ever take a stance on that. So I wanted to get your thoughts on directly Russian influence in the U.S. government and elections.
I'm totally opposed to Russian oligarchs influencing Donald Trump or our government. I'm opposed to American oligarchs influencing Donald Trump or our government. I think, as I said earlier, I said this about an hour ago, we have an oligarch problem all around the world. I mean, isn't that fairly clear?
Yep. All right. Thank you much. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Jason. I mean, the whole oligarch thing came out of the Montpelier meeting in 1947. I mean, this is the donut economics book. This is straightforward stuff. This idea that the market and the billionaires should be running everything, and that democracy is like this quaint idea. This thing out of the Enlightenment. This idea that John Locke had in 1674. It's past its prime. Now we've got the marketplace that's infallible and it's going to take it. It's nonsense. We need to go back to the core principles of small d democracy. Thanks so much for being with me and for welcoming me back, for having me here, in your home, in your ear. Thank you so much. And we'll be back tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. And that is you. Tag, you're in. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.